Ah, mierda. ¿Me ven? ¿Qué tal este lente, señores? Cercanito aquí. ¿Qué tal este lente? Se quedó dormido Marciano. No ha llegado, Girón. Dani atrás, se quitó la vaina. Mierda, pero el iPhone tiene una vaina aquí, Dani. Sí. Live. Que me borra aplicaciones, loco. Coño. Va a comenzar a hablar Jerome Powell. Dígame si se ve bien. Jerome Powell está hablando en el Congreso. Esos son los americanos que pierden más dinero con las acciones de la Fed. Jerome Powell testifica en el Congreso.
Workers are left paying the price.
Ya lo estamos escuchando. El mercado está en caída libre en estos momentos. Sí, señor.
It's a complex problem. Interest
Es un
rates
problema
are a single,
complejo.
we know, blunt tool. Raising interest rates can't rebuild our supply chain. We know, blunt tool. Raising interest rates can't rebuild our supply chains and fix demand imbalances from the pandemic. Raising interest rates won't end
Subir los
Russia's brutal
intereses
invasion
no
of
va a ayudar.
Ukraine. Raising interest rates won't prevent avian flu
No va a
from devastating
prevenir
1/3 of our egg supply or weather disaster from destroying key crops. And raising interest rates certainly won't stop big corporations from exploiting all of these crises to jack up prices far beyond the increase in their costs. Last year, corporate profits hit a record high. Corporate PR chiefs assure us that these companies just have to raise prices. Their costs are going up. The workers just want to be paid too much. They have no other choice, they tell us. Yet when you look at their profits and their executive salaries and their stock buyback plans, sure doesn't look like corporations have exhausted every available alternative. It's so brazen. Even global bankers call them the Fed to identify this profiteering is one of the biggest.
Está en el Congreso testificando Jerome Powell ante el Congreso para decir de que él es duro y que todo está bien, ok, bajo su control.
Spurring inflation. Companies have passed higher costs on to consumers, but they've also taken advantage of circumstances to expand profit margins. The broadening of inflation beyond commodity prices is more profit margin expansion than wage cost pressures. Think about that. From a chief economist at UBS, I'll say it again, they've taken advantage. These companies have taken advantage of circumstances to expand profit margins. The broadening of inflation beyond commodity prices is more profit margin expansion than wage cost pressures, unquote. The Fed, understandably, the Fed can't force corporations to change their ways or rewrite the Wall Street business model on its own, but the Fed can talk about it. High interest rates, falling wages, increasing unemployment are all hallmarks of failed policies that end up helping Wall Street, the largest corporations in the country, the wealthiest.
Señores, para que entiendan, los Estados Unidos es un país que tiene división de poderes. Aquí ahora mismo está hablando el poder judicial. No, el poder del Congreso. ¿Cuál es el poder del Congreso? El poder legislativo le está pidiendo cuentas a Jerome Powell para ver por qué él está tomando las decisiones que está tomando y que si él está tomando las decisiones por mejor de las empresas o de la gente. Ok, Jerome Powell testifica ante el gobierno de Estados Unidos.
We can speed up and strengthen our supply chains. We can bring critical manufacturing back to the U.S. We can rebuild our infrastructure. It's what we're doing with the CHIPS Act, with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. For the first time in decades, we're finally recognizing the damage that I and many of my colleagues warned corporate offshoring would do to our economy. Look at East Palestine, Ohio, a community that Senator Vance and I have visited a number of times recently. America learned about this small town last month when a Norfolk Southern train derailed and spewed hazardous material into this community. East Palestine is more than just a disaster headline. Columbia County was once the center of American ceramics manufacturing, at one time producing 80% of ceramics of dishware in this
Jerome Powell testifica ante el Congreso. Vamos a ver cómo el mercado tiembla.
Here it is 10:07 on the East Coast and 7:07 on the West Coast. Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, expected to hear from the Mexican governor that 2 of the missing Americans have been found dead, one of them wounded and one of them unharmed. This is that story that we have been following here as 4 Americans.
Corporations are expected to cut costs at any cost. They skimp on safety. They move production overseas to countries where they can pay workers less because of trade deals that they lobbied for. In Wall Street demands, they post profit increases, even in the middle of the global pandemic. That's the problem with our economy. And not only will higher interest rates not solve it, if they're overdone, they'll make it worse. We can't risk undermining one of the successes.
El dólar subiendo y Bitcoin cayendo. 2%, el SP500 no está cayendo tanto y el Nasdaq está en verde. Okay, pero tenemos Bitcoin bajando con fuerza en los 21,900.
That means Americans have more opportunities, more options, even in places that haven't seen a lot in recent years. It means people have the power to demand raises and retirement security and paid sick days and some control over their schedules. It means more Americans have the dignity that comes with a good job that provides for your family. We must here ensure that all Americans have the opportunity for that dignity of work. It's a critical time. The consequences of missteps could be severe. Mr. Chairman, 2 more things that affect your job. It's not just monetary policy that threatens American pocketbooks. Some of my colleagues have threatened the nation's full faith and credit by holding the debt ceiling hostage for partisan politics. Instead of paying our bills on time, they're essentially threatening.
Básicamente le está diciendo de todos los problemas de la Fed y vaina, de cómo lo puede solucionar. Y
unimaginable instability and chaos.
Y las cosas que puede hacer la Fed y lo que ellos están haciendo.
Knows for a financial system. The Fifth Circuit is Wall Street's, no doubt about it, the Fifth Circuit is Wall Street's favorite courthouse. It recently ruled the CFPB's independent funding is unconstitutional. If the Supreme Court upholds the Fifth Circuit's ruling, it will not only devastate CFPB, it will threaten the independent funding of many other federal agencies, including the Federal Reserve. I look forward to today's hearing how the Fed will balance its dual mandate and continue to promote an economy where everyone who wants a good job can find one, an economy that works for everyone. Senator Scott. Sorry.
That's fine. Good morning, Chairman Powell. Sitting here, looking at my prepared remarks, thinking about, there's an opening coming where Vice Chairman Brainer's moving on. I think it's really important for us to make sure that all the information that we need in order to make a good decision on the next nom that we have in a timely fashion. So I would really implore the chair to make sure that happens, that every question, every questionnaire that is asked from the person, we get. Every member of this committee has their questions answered in a timely fashion, and that the staff has their answers in a timely fashion. Listening to Chairman Brown, I thought to myself, fascinating, truly fascinating. I concluded that, well, I know Chairman Brown pretty well. I am sure he is sincere in his rant. But let me just say this. Spending and printing trillions of dollars
Gastando, imprimiendo
caving
trillones
to
de
the
dólares.
Radical left in this country.
Dándole a
Seeing
la
policies
izquierda radical
posited
en este país, viendo
and then implemented that led to the worst inflation in 40 years.
A la peor inflación en
Seeing our
40
inflation
años.
at 9.1%.
Ve nuestra inflación
Seeing
en
American families struggle because of the
9.4%.
weight of the government on their shoulders.
Ver a la gente cómo está
Seeing the
pasando trabajo por la forma que el
devastation
gobierno
from
está
South
actuando.
Carolina to Ohio.
Ver la devastación en
Unbelievable
Carolina del Norte,
that the
Carolina del
progressives
Sur y
in this
Ohio.
country who caused a
increíble
9.1% inflation
que la gente que
within
causó
turn
esto
somewhere besides in the mirror to see the absolute devastation
para ver
caused by their out-of-control
absoluta
spending
inflación,
is remarkable.
devastación. Es remarkable. Remarkable.
To stop the out-of-control inflation caused by the out-of-control spending, the Fed steps in
remarkable.
to cool the economy.
Remarkable en
Well, the
Spanish.
definition of cooling the
Notable es la palabra.
economy is necessary because we've
La
seen
definición de lo que
the
una buena
most
economía es
radical
necesaria.
approach
Porque estamos viendo
to a
la
problem that was in our rearview mirror.
Estamos viendo cómo estamos actuando en frente a un problema muy radical, un problema que teníamos en la parte trasera de nosotros, que sabíamos que iba a suceder. Estos gastos increíbles que nuestra nación nunca ha hecho en mi vida. Esa inflación de 9 puntos. Como un niño que crecí, ¿por qué?
A 40% today, 100% just a year ago, increase in the gas prices devastates single mothers around this country.
A las madres solteras de este país, a la gente que está
savings are being depleted with an average cost just last month of a $433 increase because of inflation.
$43, un incremento de $43 por la inflación.
Besides a mirror,
tú te paras frente al espejo y es impresionante. La verdad es que cuando tú ves que esto sube, cuando tu gas está arriba por un 20%, cuando tu electricidad sube un 20%, ¿dónde están en el mundo? No puede estar en este mismo universo. Donde está bien, le están metiendo presión para que baje la inflación.
But fall into a ditch.
¿Por qué?
Why are we in the ditch?
¿Por qué estamos ahí? ¿Por qué?
Progressives used the
Por
pandemic
la forma agresiva que usamos la pandemia para imprimir más dinero, formó
of spending
muchos gastos que tomó el dinero de los americanos a pie y lo puso en los confortes del gobierno.
There is a better way.
Debe de haber una mejor forma. La mejor forma de confiar en el pueblo americano. Cuando tú lo haces, no tenemos que venga la Fed a subir los intereses tan alto que complican la economía. Que hoy, que la casa, el precio de la misma casa
is twice as high.
Exacto.
Why?
Que los intereses de tu casa son 2 veces más caros. ¿Por qué? Porque nos volvimos locos gastando. Yo estoy seguro que no tengo tiempo para mi pregunta, pero voy a decir sin ninguna pregunta. Sin ninguna duda. Yo veo el país y me pregunto yo mismo, ¿qué tan devastador ha sido que hoy $433 más que lo que costó hace un año? La respuesta es que es una crisis. Cuando la familia promedio en nuestro país no tenía $400 porque los precios subieron $400. Hay que tener una conversación sobre la renta en el país, ver a la inflación,
devastation of a snarling supply chain that we haven't seen in my lifetime.
Nunca lo hemos visto
run by my friends in the progressives. Unbelievable.
Increíble.
But to get to you,
pero comenzando contigo, Paul.
One of the comments that you've made that I think is really important in one of the speeches you gave in January, and I apologize for my rant.
Yo pido disculpas por mis quejas, por mis
it is essential, you said, that we stick to our statutory goals and authorities, and that we resist the temptation to broaden our scope to address other important social issues of the day. Taking on new goals, however worthy, without a clear statutory mandate would undermine the case of our independence. He further noted that, and I quote, without explicit congressional legislation, it would be inappropriate for us to use our monetary policy or supervisory tools to promote a greener economy.
Una citación que hizo Jerome Powell en donde decía que sin la aprobación del Congreso ellos no tienen mucha herramienta. Vamos a ver, le va a preguntar.
Do you still stand by those comments?
Él le dice, ¿tú todavía piensas que esos comentarios son correctos?
Thank you. Finally,
dijo que sí.
I know, we're not in the question. I know, I get it. Finally,
finalmente.
4 minutes and 12 seconds.
Yes, I knew the chairman would dock that from my time. And I appreciate you doing so
with a sense of humor.
With a great humor, great humor. Finally, several of my Republican colleagues and I sent a letter to you discussing Vice Chair Supervisor.
Jerome Powell le tiene que decir que mira qué pasa. Es que la gente está gastando mucho. Mírate a ti con un Apple Watch Ultra. ¿Cuál es la maldita necesidad de tú tener un maldito Apple Watch Ultra? Y entonces te estás quejando de que la cosa es tan cara. Si la gente sigue gastando, devalúan el dinero. ¿Qué tú haces con un Apple Watch Ultra? Tú no ves que tú corres, tú no nadas, tú te ves que tú tienes una barriga, que tú no corres para ninguna parte, pero Jerome Powell no es tan violento como yo.
We'll hear from Chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, on monetary policy in the state of our economy. And I don't expect Chair Powell to weigh in on the mini debate we just had, but I think we all know that the debt increase was much larger under President Trump and a Republican Senate than it has been since. Chair Powell, thank you for your service.
El incremento de la deuda ha sido fue peor con Donald Trump y con el Congreso republicano.
Scott and other members of the committee, I
Hola,
appreciate
Scott,
the opportunity to present the Federal Reserve's semi-annual monetary policy report. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation is causing significant hardship, and we're strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal.
Y estamos bien comprometidos con llevar la inflación a un 2%.
Forceful actions to tighten
El año pasado tomamos acciones muy fuertes para bajarlo.
And the full effects of our tightening so far
en el efecto completo de nuestra vaina.
Even so, we have more work to do.
Aunque lo hemos hecho, tenemos más trabajo que hacer.
Our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices.
Nuestro mandato compartido para promover más empleos. Señores, yo le voy a pedir que si a usted le gusta que yo esté aquí, que yo deje todo lo que yo estaba haciendo para venir a hacerle un live aquí. Señores, por favor, dejen un manito arriba. El canal de finanzas está medio jodón, el de finanzas, porque la gente no apoya. El canal de tecnología uno se pone a hablar de teléfono y la gente apoya y da like. Aquí la gente nada más viene a consumir. Como no es divertido, no dan like. Dani, algo pasa con la televisión hoy.
Some of this reversal,
apágale y préndelo. Dani, algo pasa con la televisión. Apágale y préndelo otra vez.
In much of the country. Still, the breadth of the reversal, along with revisions to the previous quarter, suggests that inflationary pressures are running higher than expected at the time of our previous
La inflación estaba subiendo muchísimo más de lo esperado.
From a broader perspective, inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year, but remains well above
pero todavía sube por encima, todavía se mantiene por encima de nuestro objetivo de 2%.
PCE inflation has slowed from its peak of 7% in June to 5.4% in January, as energy prices have declined and supply chain bottlenecks have eased.
Ha mejorado, pero todavía falta mucho.
Over the past 12 months,
los pasados 12 meses,
which excludes the volatile food and energy prices, was 4.7%.
Era 4.7%.
As supply chain bottlenecks have eased and tighter policy has restrained demand, inflation in the core goods sector has fallen.
Ha bajado.
And while housing services inflation remains too high,
mientras que la inflación en los servicios de la casa se mantiene en alto,
points to a deceleration in this component of inflation
a que sí existe una desaceleración. Diablo.
That said,
Bitcoin está de relajo. Mira Bitcoin, mira.
La
madre. Mira Bitcoin, ni un relajo Bitcoin. Mira eso.
A category that accounts for more than half of core consumer expenditures. To restore price stability, we'll need to see lower inflation in this sector. And there will very likely be some softening in the labor market
conditions. Y vamos a seguir trabajando.
Although nominal wage gains have slowed somewhat in recent months, they remain above
Usted le da
what
un
is
like
consistent with.
Y este video le llega a más gente. Y mientras más gente, más uno se siente mejor aquí. Tú sabes, más apoyo, más de todo. Gracias por el like. Hay 1000 personas y solamente hay 400 likes. Vamos a ver. Actívense.
Rising at a below-trend pace of 0.9%. Although consumer spending appears to be expanding at a solid pace this quarter, other recent indicators point to subdued growth of spending and production. Activity in the housing sector continues to weaken, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. Despite the slowdown in growth, the labor market remains extremely tight.
Aunque hemos tenido una baja en el crecimiento, los trabajos siguen bien.
Job gains remained very strong in January.
Más trabajo se mantuvo bien fuerte en enero.
As of the end of December, there were 1.9 job openings for each unemployed individual, close to the all-time peak.
1.9 más empleo por cada desempleado. O sea, por cada desempleado hubo 1.9 más empleo.
Turning to monetary policy.
Regresamos a la política monetaria.
Our longer run goal of 2%.
La inflación está muy por arriba. Y el departamento, el mercado laboral por
raising
encima
interest rates
también.
by 4.5 percentage points over the past year.
Hemos subido el interés a 4.5%.
Ongoing increases in the target range for the federal funds rate will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy.
Lo dijo que van a seguir subiendo los intereses, que son apropiados, que sigan subiendo los intereses.
In addition,
vamos a ver Bitcoin, lo dijo.
Reducing the size of our balance sheet.
Van a seguir subiendo los intereses y reduciendo el balance.
On demand in the most interest-sensitive
lo dijo, van a seguir subiendo los intereses y reduciendo el balance de los gastos.
For the full effects of monetary restraint,
para el full efecto,
especially on inflation.
Ahí está Bitcoin. Cuando dijo eso, se puso esa velita roja. Vamos a ver. Vamos a ver.
The committee slowed the pace of interest rate increases over its
Regrésame para la derecha.
We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting, taking into account the totality of the incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation. Although inflation has been moderating in
aunque la inflación se ha estado moderando, el proceso para bajar la inflación a 2% tiene una long way to go.
As I mentioned, the latest
long way to go, okay? Aunque la inflación está bajando, todavía tenemos una long way to go, okay?
Previously anticipated. If the totality of the data were to indicate that faster tightening is warranted, we'd be prepared to increase the pace of rate hikes.
Si no sigue bajando, vamos a estar preparados para reducirlo más.
Restrictive stance of monetary policy for some time. Our overarching focus is using our tools to bring inflation
Nuestro enfoque es usar nuestras herramientas para bajar la inflación a un 2%. Existe un largo camino por recorrer.
Maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. The historical record cautions strongly against prematurely loosening policy. We will stay the course until the job is done.
Nos vamos a mantener en curso.
Our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country.
Vamos
Everything we do is in service
a mantener el curso hasta que el trabajo termine.
Everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Ya lo mató.
Mr. Chair, there are 23 of us on this committee. Almost everyone will
Somos
be here
23.
Today. I ask each of us to
cada uno, por favor, haga una pregunta rápida.
Because we have votes at 11:30.
Dijo que, mira, nosotros estamos bajando estamos dándole con todos los intereses para bajar la inflación. Señores, tienen que recordar que aquí hay un grupo de gente que no entiende la economía y tienen Apple Watch Ultra y se están quejando de que la cosa es tan cara con un maldito Apple Watch Ultra en la mano. No entienden la economía ni las finanzas. Oye, dice que las cosas no van a mejorar, dice este. Que las cosas no van a mejorar por más que él suba los intereses. A ver.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman. So we've been aware since the very beginning and have discussed this publicly on many occasions that there are some differences this time. We, in particular, have not seen the kind of supply side collapse that we saw at the very beginning of the inflation outbreak. Also, the outbreak of a war which had significant effects on commodity prices a year ago. So all that is different. There are also, though, some similarities. There is a mismatch between supply and demand. You can see that in the goods sector still. You saw it in housing prices going up over 40% since before the pandemic, and you see it in the labor market where we have 1.9 job openings for every opening, for every unemployed person. So we're well aware that this particular situation involves a mix of cycles, forces, not all of which our tools can affect, but there is a job here for us to do in better aligning demand with supply.
Okay, understanding you have limited tools to address inflation, and our conversations in the past show my concern about continued rate increases that may not actually address the root cause of inflation. They hurt workers, and many of us contend we can't follow the same old playbook. Next question. Last year, 3 banking regulators issued proposed updates on the Canadian Reinvestment Act to account for changes in our banking system. My question is, does the Fed remain committed to work with FDIC and OCC
que si la
to
FTC
finalize the CRA rule,
está
and when
dispuesta a
will that
seguir
rule
trabajando
likely
con
be
la
finalized?
FTC?
Yes, we do remain committed, and I believe we are in
Compren Bolívar, es mejor el peso argentino.
on the revisions to the rule. So now we're in the process of writing all that down, and that'll take some time. And then after that, of course, it will come to the Board of Governors for a vote, and that'll involve briefings and discussions. And I can't give you an exact date, but
as quickly as possible.
Yes, but it will be some months.
Okay, thank you. Banks weathered the shock of the COVID-19 shutdowns mostly because of the fiscal response provided by Congress. We now see a spike in loan delinquencies, an increase in overall risk. Banks are again plowing billions.
1,100 personas y solamente hay 500 likes. ¿Qué está pasando, señores?
Into stock buybacks, which makes me concerned if there's a downturn in the economy, banks could end up with too little capital. That's why I'm worried about any potential rollbacks of safeguards or regulations. Can you assure me that the Fed will keep capital requirements strong and exercise more long-term forward thinking than corporate CEOs that seem to be focused on the short term?
Le preguntó que si la Fed va a estar comprometido y no será como los empresarios que se enfocan en hacer dinero para ellos. Que tú me puedes asegurar.
Give me an opinion about you're looking more forward than companies that look at the short term benefits of stock buybacks. Mr. Chair, when you last testified, I asked you about the risk posed by crypto assets, stablecoins,
el riesgo de la criptomoneda.
Possibilities. How is the Fed evaluating the risks of crypto-related activities by supervised institutions?
¿Cuál es el efecto que tiene?
This is something we've been quite active in this
area. Esto es algo que
area,
nosotros hemos estado muy activos y te voy a decir que
we believe that innovation is very important.
Creemos que la innovación es muy importante. No queremos que las regulaciones dañen la innovación. Pero nosotros, como todo el mundo, hemos estado viendo lo que está sucediendo con FTX. Y lo que vemos es muchas cosas calientes. Vemos riesgos, así que lo que hemos estado haciendo es asegurarnos de que las instituciones que están reguladas sigan haciéndolo bien y que tengan mucho cuidado con el espacio cripto. Nosotros hemos enviado con el FTC notificaciones para eso.
I've long pushed for the Fed to prioritize workers and for the leaders of the Fed to reflect the diversity of the country. We've made progress. Our work is not done. We have a new opening. Understand? It's not your job to appoint the new Fed.
No, básicamente dijo como que no, nosotros hemos estado trabajando, pero como todo el mundo, nosotros seguimos viendo y no queremos que las regulaciones dañen la innovación, pero también estamos atentos a lo que ha ido sucediendo.
Thank you, Chairman.
Vendí.
Obviously, the Chairman and I both have strong passions about
Obviamente, nosotros tenemos mucha pasión sobre estos temas. La importancia de que tenemos una fuerza mercado capital relacionado a todo. Que los americanos tengan la habilidad.
I hope that we get there. Building on the same comment that the Chairman had around capital standards is where I'm going to go with my thoughts today. When I think back on these last few years, it's hard not to recognize the extraordinary efforts our financial institutions of all sizes, frankly, undertook to administer a program like the PPP, all while weathering a shutdown of our global economy. I welcome your thoughts, but from my viewpoint, our banking system was resilient. Our financial institutions stepped up and delivered aid to support families and businesses every single day. That's why Vice Chair Barr's broad comments around holistic review of our capital trouble me so much. We should be laser focused on our economy and addressing the needs of everyday Americans trying to forge del americano de a pie open the door to opportunity.
Para abrir la puerta a oportunidades. Como tú y yo sabemos,
and its quality must be continually scrutinized, but increased capital does not necessarily provide an increased benefit, and requiring banks
requiere que los bancos
risk-based and appropriately tailored to a bank's size, scope, and activities can cause more harm than good. At a time of record inflation, where everyday needs are more expensive, we should not be pursuing actions that are harmful.
Buscando acciones que
we should be supporting the engine of our economy, small businesses.
Que nosotros debemos de estar soportando, apoyando a los motores de nuestra economía.
That you will ensure this review is appropriate. Keeping the impacts on our banking system front and center. We must promote and further the growth of our economy and thereby our people. Anything less should be unacceptable.
Algo más
to
debe
that
ser
end, will you commit that any ongoing capital review by the Federal Reserve will follow the law and that any follow-on regulatory proposals will be risk-based and tailored to an institution's activity, size, and complexity, and not a one-size-fits-all.
Y no solamente,
yes,
o sea, algo que
I can easily commit to that. You know, we're very strongly committed to tailoring.
Tú estás comprometido a trabajar con nosotros a cada situación disponible.
Tailoring, which is a long-held principle for us and also now a requirement in the law.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. 2 weeks ago, I sent a letter with Chairman McHenry to Chair Gensler regarding the SEC's climate disclosure rule, urging him to rescind his proposal and reminding him that the SEC is a market regulator, not a climate forecaster. Much like Congress designed the SEC to protect investors, to maintain fair, orderly, and efficient markets, and to facilitate capital formation, and not to advance progressive climate change policies, Congress designed the Federal Reserve to promote price stability and maximum employment, not to play politics. To that end, I find worrying the Fed's announcement of recent actions to consider climate-related scenarios, coupled with remarks by the Vice Chair of Supervision, as attempts to incorporate broader ESG policies into the financial services system. Banks have and continue to account for weather-related risks in their risk management. But efforts
Señores, estamos atentos, no se preocupen, que yo me quedo callado o algo porque es que no es importante lo que están diciendo. Yo estoy atento de que digan algo importante, yo grito y hago bulla y vaina. Ustedes pueden seguir fregando, haciendo pupú o lo que sea que ustedes estén haciendo y cuando venga algo duro, yo,
high inflation. I expect our central bank to focus its time and resources on bringing inflation down, not on policy outside of its mandate. I noted in my opening statement a recent speech that you've given about the state of the Fed and how you should resist the temptation to broaden its scope and to address social issues. Do you agree that the Federal Reserve does not have the authority or statutory direction to use its monetary policy or supervisory tools to wade into the ESG or other climate policies?
I do. As you know, there's a tightly focused role that we do have, that I believe that we have, but I would agree with your statement.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I have 20 seconds left, but I'm going to defer because of my earlier question to my opening statement.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Menendez is close, but not here yet. So, Senator Rounds. Oh, okay. So, but nice try.
A ver, ¿quién viene? Vamos a ver los comentarios, gente.
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, first of all, welcome. It's always good to have you in front of our committee. As you know, both core and headline inflation have remained persistently elevated. And over the past 12 months, real average hourly earnings fell by 1.8%, about 4% since President Biden took office. To make ends meet as prices increase, more Americans are leaning on credit cards. At the end of 2022, credit card debt hit a record of $930.6 billion, an 18.5% spike from a year earlier. and an average credit card balance rose to $5,805. Over the past year, the Fed has acted aggressively to tame inflation, and yet we are still seeing price increases. And as we've discussed this several times, but I recognize that it's been an ongoing discussion, but I believe that this further proves that we have long been feeling the effects of a policy-induced inflation resulting from decisions by the Biden administration, primarily cutting off the resources necessary to improve and increase domestic energy production. I continue to be concerned that if you attempt to use the tools that are available at this time for the Fed, then I believe that we're going to have a challenge of not being able to address specifically the challenges brought out when you have a policy is promoting higher prices with regard to energy,
Javier, con lo que dijiste ya
as
me di
opposed
cuenta
to
que
what
era un
you're trying to do,
novatillo.
which
Vamos a
is to
ver.
bring down the total overall cost. And I just wanted to ask, I guess, and you're going to think this is something that we've heard before, but do you believe that you currently have the
¿Tú crees
monetary
que tú
policy
tienes las
tools
pólizas y
to
las
actually
herramientas
reduce
para
inflation?
reducir la inflación?
And I just put it in this
Le está preguntando una
perspective.
pregunta
In January of
personal.
2021, the CPI was 1.4%.
En enero el CPI
when the
fue
Biden administration began.
1.4.
In January of 2022,
In
and this is
January,
before the Russian invasion
enero,
of
era
Ukraine, CPI was at 7.5%, 7.5%.
7.5.
Today, March of 2022, CPI is 8.5%.
8.5.
Wouldn't it be fair to assess that a lot of the policy or the inflation that we've seen here may very well be due to policy decisions by this administration?
El diablo. Si la
Senator,
administración
not for us
no es,
to
ay,
point
ay,
fingers.
que si es Joe Biden el culpable de esto.
You asked whether we,
Le dijo, mira, la inflación estaba en tanto.
and we do.
Y
Over
después la
time.
inflación estaba en 1, y después la inflación estaba en 7, y después la inflación estaba en 8. ¿Tú no crees que es culpable del otro viejito que se está muriendo en la Casa Blanca?
Tools available to you.
A ver.
And the limited number of tools that you have are designed to impact simply
Le
the
tiró al
reduction in
cuello y
prices
él le
and
dijo,
so
no,
forth,
yo
and
no
yet,
voy a opinar de
if there
eso.
are competing interests out there that are pushing
Ay,
prices
Dios mío.
higher, you don't have the
Le
wherewithal
está
to decide
preguntando si
one
tiene
tool
las
versus another
herramientas
based on whether
necesarias
it's
para bajar la
policy-induced
vaina.
or whether it is a matter of a shortage in supplies from outside or whether it's war-related.
That's right. Our tools essentially work on demand, moderating demand, and so that's what we can do.
So if there were policies in place that actually help to reduce inflation, in other words, and by that, I'm just going to look at energy alone just as a good example. If policies were in place that were actually allowing energy prices to come down in the United States, then you would have less of a need to use the very blunt tools that you do have right now with regard to increasing rate increases. Is that a fair statement, sir?
Eso es algo,
In
tuviera
a
la
sense
manera
it
tú
is,
de
but I
bajar.
would just
A
say
ver,
on energy,
I'm not trying to get you to a policy discussion.
No quiero que tú discutas sobre una política de
energy policy.
discusión.
I just want to make it clear that
Yo quiero que
you
esté
have to
claro de
respond
que
to
tú
what's in
tienes que
front of you.
responder a lo
And
que
it
está
doesn't
enfrente
matter
de
where the
ti.
inflation is
Y
coming
no
from or what's
importa de
driving
dónde
it
viene
up.
la inflación,
You're simply
sino
trying to bring it
tú
back down to
simplemente
that
estás
2%
tratando
number
de bajar la
with the only tools
2%
that you've really got.
con las únicas
Yes,
herramientas que
I will
tienes.
say on
Pero
energy,
y él
energy
dice,
has
sí,
tended over time to
la
fluctuate
energía
up and
siempre
down,
fluctúa de arriba y abajo
mainly affected by our tools.
y no
So,
está afectada
the
por
things
nuestras
we look at are the
herramientas.
things-
Las
are
cosas
really
que
things that
nosotros
are
vemos
tightly
son
linked to demand in the U.S. economy.
la
Those we
demanda en
can
los
affect.
Estados
And I
Unidos.
think
Eso es lo que
just the
podemos
fact that you've
afectar.
been increasing interest rates, and yet inflation continues to ride up, would suggest, just as you've just indicated, that when you have high energy prices, it's tough to impact that part of it with the monetary policy that you've got available to you.
Danny,
So we focus on everything, but we also focus on core in particular, which doesn't include energy prices. And what's happened is core inflation has come down, but nowhere near as fast as we might have hoped, and it has a long way to go.
Thank you. One last question. Last June, Vice Chairman of Supervision Michael Barr testified before this committee that he would defend the use of the aggregation method as an alternative approach to the insurance capital standards, the ICS, proposed by the IAIS. As the final compatibility criteria set to come out later this year, can you confirm that you share Vice Chair Barr's views on this AM?
I will confirm that, but I'll have to get back to you on the status of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Menendez of New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to take this moment
quiero tomar este momento
to remind my colleagues that there are more than 62 million Latinos that call the United States home.
62 millones de latinos. Latinos, vamos, somos los más grandes. Vamos a ver, latinos. Vamos a ver la pregunta.
We contribute almost
Contribuimos $3,000 trillones de dólares
en GDP.
Y los latinos no tienen representación. Este es mexicano.
There has never been a single member of the Board of Governors or regional bank president who has the lived experience of being Latino in the United States. And in practice, that means that the voices of nearly 1/5 of our country's people are repeatedly drowned out when the Fed is making critical decisions on economic policy. Decisions that affect whether a Latino family can afford their first home, find a job that pays a living wage, send their children to college, save for a comfortable retirement, or get a loan to expand their business. Right now, the Biden administration has a clear opportunity
cubano.
Its next nomination to the Board of Governors.
Está hablando de por qué no hay latinos en la Fed.
Highly qualified Latino candidates.
Deben de haber muchos latinos como marcianos.
Fields of economics.
Ay, que me pongan a mí, papá. Ay, Dios mío, que me pongan a mí. Ay, yo resuelvo de una vez. Dicen aquí, Menéndez es un ladronazo. Un latino no parece latino, es noruego. Él es vaina cubano.
5 opportunities over the past 2 years to nominate a qualified Latino economist to serve at the Federal Reserve.
Él le está preguntando, a mí no me interesa eso, yo no quiero, no, lo siento, en Latinoamérica la economía no está tan buena. No.
And I hope the administration makes the right choice.
Y yo espero que la administración haga la opción correcta con esta nominación. Claro, qué feo se ve, Dani. Qué feo se ve.
That the United States dollar is the reserve.
Yes, I would.
And that brings us enormous benefits, does it not?
Yes, it does.
Now, 12 years ago, a Republican brought us to the brink of defaulting on the debt for the first time in history of this country, jeopardizing our credit and the world economy.
Yo lo siento, pero no confío mucho en latino con mi dinero.
Republicans are recklessly demanding draconian spending cuts to programs that hardworking U.S. families rely on in exchange for allowing the Treasury Department to pay for spending that Congress, including most of them, have already voted to authorize. If you want to talk about spending cuts, it seems to me that the budget is the time to do that, but not to put the full faith and credit of the United States at risk. Chairman Powell, can you talk about the catastrophic damage a debt default would inflict on the economy?
So I guess I will start, if I can, by saying that these are really matters between the executive branch and Congress. We do not seek to play a role in these policy issues. But at the end of the day, there's only one solution to this problem, and that is Congress. Whatever else may happen will happen, but Congress really needs to raise the debt ceiling. That's the only way out. In a timely way that allows us to,
el gobierno suba la deuda.
And if we fail to do so,
el techo de deuda. Y si no lo hacemos,
I think that the consequences are hard to estimate, but they could be extraordinarily adverse,
pero son extremadamente adversas. Puede ser un problema grande.
I think that's a...
O sea, le está pidiendo el techo de la deuda, si hay que subirlo. ¿Y qué van a hacer, Menéndez? Dime, ¿van a ir a pedirle préstamo a Fidel? No, baby, hay que subir el techo de la deuda.
I asked you about the abstract question of what happens if you have a debt default. Isn't even this constant fight putting into question the possibility that the United States will not honor its full faith and credit have consequences within the economy?
In principle, it could. I think markets tend and observers tend to watch this and tend to think that it will work out, and it has in the past worked out. So it needs to work out this time too.
Now, seeing your testimony before the committee, is it fair to say that you'll do whatever is necessary to tame inflation?
We serve a dual mandate, and we will do what we can, everything we can to restore price stability while also serving maximum employment.
And primarily that means additional rate increases, would it not? What other tool do you have?
That's what we have. The balance sheet, the shrinkage of the balance sheet will continue too, but it's principally rate hikes.
So the question is, when does that part of doing anything necessary to tame employment, with your other mandate of maximum employment.
Not now. We have the lowest unemployment in 50.
Jerome Powell solamente tiene dos herramientas para bajar los intereses. Bajar los gastos, el papel de baño, usar menos papel de baño y subir los intereses.
It really isn't now, where we're very far from our price stability mandate, and in effect, the economy is past most estimates of maximum employment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Menendez. Senator Kennedy of Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, thank you for being here.
Señores, están activos, señores, la mejor traducción aquí, y viendo el mercado, Bitcoin ahora mismo está ahí manteniéndose. Ya, ok, vamos a seguir.
I'm generally supportive
Vamos, mándame
of the actions of the Fed right now, and I'm not going to ask you today to blame anybody.
Oh my God, disculpen.
When Congress spends money,
Cuando el Congreso gasta
it
dinero,
stimulates the economy.
estimula la economía, ¿sí o no?
Well, it would depend on whether that's funded by tax increases or not. So if there's a spending that's not accompanied by taxes, would have a net at the margin stimulative effect.
Well, and when Congress borrows money to spend even more, that stimulates the economy even more, does it not?
At the margin, yeah.
¿Quién que está diciendo que no es la mejor traducción? Espérate, déjame ver.
If Congress reduced
si el Congreso reduce
the rate of growth in its spending,
el gasto y los gastos, y
the rate of
reduce
growth in its debt accumulation,
el vaina de gasto,
it would make your job easier
va a ser
in
tu trabajo que
reducing
sea más
inflation,
fácil para reducir la inflación. La tasa
I don't think fiscal policy right now is a big factor driving inflation at this moment, but it's absolutely essential
el fiscal personal sea esencial para la economía, pero no es lo principal, pero sí ayuda. Okay,
I'm not trying to trick you.
Yo no estoy tratando
You're raising interest rates.
Tú estás subiendo los intereses.
You're raising interest rates to slow the economy, are you
para
not?
bajar la economía, ¿sí o no?
Yes, to cool the economy
Sí, señor,
off.
para bajar la economía.
And one of the ways you measure your success, other than fluctuation in gross domestic product, is the unemployment rate.
Es viendo
Is it not?
El employment
yes, one
rate.
of the measures.
Una de las medidas.
So in effect, I'm not being critical. When you're slowing the economy, you're trying to put people out of work. That's your job, is it not?
Eso es lo que ustedes hacen, ¿sí o no?
Not really. We're trying to restore price stability.
Nosotros estamos tratando de establecer.
Not wages.
You're trying to raise the unemployment
Tú estás
rate.
tratando de subir la tasa de desempleo.
That means, I know you don't like the phrase, so let me strike.
Yo sé que tú no lo quieres
You're trying
decir,
to raise
pero
the unemployment
tú
rate.
quieres subir el desempleo, ¿sí o no?
No, we're not trying to raise it. We're trying to realign supply and demand, which could happen through a bunch of channels, like, for example, just job openings.
Let me put it another way.
Déjame ponerlo de otra forma, ¿ok?
The economists did a wonderful study.
Los economistas tienen un estudio
10
increíble.
disinflationary periods
Ellos
in America
tratan de
going all
buscar
the way back to the
puntos
1950s.
o periodos
Disinflation
desinflacionarios.
is what you're trying to do. It's a slowing in the
Lo que
rate
tú tratando de
of
hacer es
inflation.
desinflacionar la economía.
Yes.
¿Estoy correcto, sí o
In other
no?
words, prices don't go down, they just don't go up as fast. Deflation
No
is
es
when
bajar la
prices actually
economía,
go
desinflación.
down. You're trying to achieve
Lo que quiere es
disinflation, are you not?
desinflation.
Yes, we are.
Exactamente.
Based on history, in the 10 times
Basado en la historia, en las 10 veces
that we got inflation down,
hemos bajado la
disinflation since the
inflación.
1950s, in order to reduce
para
inflation
bajar la
by
inflación
2%,
a 2%,
unemployment had to go up 3.6%.
el desempleo,
Now,
la tasa de desempleo
is it
tiene que
not?
subir un 3%, ¿sí
I
o
don't
no?
have the numbers in front of me, but yes,
Yo no
the
tengo los
standard
nombres
has
enfrente
been
de mí,
that there
pero
have
sí.
been recessions and downturns when
Okay.
the Fed
Lo
has
que baja
tried
ha
to
sido
reduce
Now,
la
right
inflación
now,
y la
the
recesión.
current
Okay.
inflation rate
Yo soy
6.4%.
Jerome Powell, pero vamos para afuera a pelear y ya, vamos a resolverlo como hombre.
Right. I'm not asking you
Yo no te estoy
to
preguntando.
again, blame anybody.
Que
But if
culpe a
history
nadie,
is
pero
right,
si la historia
unless you
está en
get
lo
some
correcto,
help, in order to get inflation
en
down
orden
from
para bajar la inflación de
6.4%
6.4
to, let's say,
a
4.4%,
4.2%,
the unemployment rate is going to have to rise to 7%.
la
based on
tasa de
history.
desempleo tiene que
That's
subir
what
a
the record would say.
4% basado
Okay.
en la
And to get
historia,
inflation down to
basado en datos
2.2%,
históricos. Y
based
para
on
bajar la
history,
inflación a 2%,
An immutable fact
en base en historia,
unemployment would have to go to 10.6%.
El desempleo tiene que subir a 10%, no.
I wouldn't.
That's what the record shows. That's what the history shows.
Yeah, I don't think that kind of a number is at all.
I mean, I know you're reluctant to admit it, and you don't want to get in the middle of a policy. But I think it's undeniable. It's undeniable that the only way we're going to get this sticky inflation down is to attack it on the monetary side, which you're doing, and on the fiscal side, which means Congress has got to reduce the rate of growth of spending and reduce the rate of growth of debt accumulation. Now,
la deuda, la acumulación de deuda.
I get that. Ahora, you don't want to get in the middle of that fight.
Que tú no te quieres poner en el
but
medio
the
de
more
eso,
we help on the fiscal side, the fewer people you're going to have to put out of work. Isn't that a fact?
Tú vas a tener que poner fuera de su trabajo. Eso no es una realidad.
It could work out that way.
Sir?
It could work out that way.
Yes,
vamos a salir para afuera a pelear.
County Senator Reid of Rhode Island is recognized.
Oh my
Thanks
God.
very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman.
Salimos para afuera y nos damos golpes, manito, como antes. Yo no puedo.
Over at the globalized supply chain disrupted significantly.
Oh my God.
And we're in the process, in some respects, of rebuilding a supply chain with emphasis on sourcing in the United
papá,
States.
Está muriendo ya. Déjame ver,
What
déjame ver.
extent did that disruptive
que le ponga,
supply chain
acerca la
contribute
cámara,
to
por favor.
inflation? And to what extent will the new, if you envisioned it, the new supply chain that is located
Ay, Dios
in
mío.
the United States and other countries affect inflation?
So the initial outbreak of inflation was all about spending on goods where people couldn't spend on services. So goods spending went way up, and the global supply chain, many goods are imported. The global supply chain just collapsed, and that was the source of the original inflation. It has now spread over the last 2 years to housing and also to the rest of the service sector. So to your question, we are seeing goods inflation has been coming down for some time now. It's still too high, but it's coming down. Housing services is there's in the pipeline. You see the new leases that are being signed, and what that tells you is that in the next you'll see that come down. But this service sector, financial services, medical services, travel and leisure.
Yo no puedo leer los comentarios, me desconcentro.
That's really where that's the source of the inflation we have now, which had nothing to do with the supply, not much to do with the supply chain. That's where the challenge is now.
And is there anything you can do that would target that service area without affecting the other areas?
There's not really. You know, our monetary policy tools.
¿Cómo así que estás transmitiendo lo mismo en los 4 canales? ¿Cómo así?
A different topic, and that is, as you're probably aware, the Fifth Circuit delivered a ruling in the Community Financial Services Association versus CFPB that the CFPB's funding mechanism is unconstitutional.
Oh my God, yo también estoy en el canal principal.
The CFPB is a bureau of the Federal Reserve. Both the Board of Governors and the CFPB rely on the same source of funds and draw on those funds in virtually.
Oh my God, yo también estoy en vivo en el canal de blogs. What the heck? Oh. Y los comentarios.
I have to say, we have significant responsibilities, but I would be reluctant to.
Señores del canal de blogs, pásense al canal de finanzas. Oh my God. ¿Cómo así? ¿Y este huevo, Dios mío? No mames, si tengo la pantalla aquí abierta y todo.
We've going back and forth on the impact of rate hikes.
Por acá activo. ¿Qué pasó con el video de hoy? Ok.
You've indicated previously that
atención.
Wages,
atención. Si usted está en el canal de blogs, pásese a Marciano Finanzas. Disculpen. Oh my God. Pásense al de Marciano Finanzas. Hay 400 personas y 500 likes. Oh. Hay más apoyo por allá. Busque Marciano Finanzas y le va a salir en vivo. Voy a cortar la transmisión. ¿Cómo así? Berta, voy a cortar la transmisión del Marciano en vivo en el de canal de en el canal de blogs. Disculpen, vamos a unirnos todo en un solo lugar. Ok, bye.
Supply and demand issues, but also just things that we haven't seen before, like the war in Ukraine.
¡Qué huevo! Y me mandan $20.
So We have many unusual factors.
Oh my God, por el otro canal no me mandan nada y por este me mandan $20.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Reid. Senator Brett, Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, it's great to have you here
seguimos,
today.
Perdón.
Over the past 2 years, we've seen the highest inflation of my lifetime, driving up costs for American families across the board. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, the annual inflation rate in 2021 was 7%, and in 2022 it was 6.5%. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the cost of food went up 10% in 2022. And the real effects of that is moms and dads across this nation that are working to put food on the table for their kids, for their babies.
La comida ha subido 10% más.
This has devastated hardworking Americans, causing a kitchen-table crisis in every corner of our country, as the price of food, energy, and housing have all skyrocketed. In response, the Federal Reserve has raised the Federal Reserve Fund rate more than 4 percentage points. Being far from transient, inflation has remained persistent, high, and well above the Fed's long-run goal of remaining under 2%. In the coming year, what factors and indicators are you paying attention to as you and the Federal Open Market Committee decide on whether to increase rates?
So I'd say a couple things to that. First, we're going to be looking at inflation in the 3 sectors that I mentioned: the goods sector, the housing sector, and the broader service sector. We need the inflation that's already underway in the goods sector to continue, and that's really important. In the housing sector, we just need the time to pass so that reported inflation comes down, and it's effectively in the pipeline as long as new leases are being signed at relatively small increases. So we'll be watching very, very carefully, though, at the larger service sector, which is 56% of consumer spending and more than that of what's currently inflation. So that's one thing we'll be watching that very carefully.
Alguien me dice de que acabaste con el sensei, únete a Maverick y acaba de una vez. Mira que pasa es que Maverick hizo una estafa, bro, en verdad. En verdad, yo estoy de acuerdo con él, con que él ataque a Salomondrín y lo destape y todo, pero yo nunca me voy a unir a él porque él hizo una estafa, bro. Entonces yo no quiero unirme a él para después que él venga a hacer una estafa y yo quede manchado. Él puede seguir atacando por allá. ¿Entiendes? Él puede seguir atacando por allá. Bien, perfecto. Aunque estemos en la misma guerra, no quiere decir que somos panas. ¿Entiendes? So, yo no puedo unirme a Maverick. Y nunca lo voy a hacer. ¿Ok? Él se burla de mí, de mis errores que yo hice al inicio. Pero él no hizo errores. Él hizo una estafa. Él llevó a cabo una estafa. Entonces, no estamos en él.
About labor participation. So when you look at the unemployment rate, and we've heard my colleagues discuss people having to be displaced in order for us to maybe get to the inflation rate that we would like as a nation, I'd like to focus on the labor participation rate. So right now it's 62.4%. If there were an increase in people coming back into the workforce, would that be a positive factor with regards to driving us down to the 2% rate that you would want to achieve?
I think that it would. I mean, remember those people coming into jobs. Yes. That would be great because the economy clearly wants more people than are currently working. Of course, those people would then spend more, so it wouldn't be a zero-sum game. But it would be great for the country and great for them if they were to come into the labor force.
Amen. I believe that increasing in capital requirements on financial institutions would have a chilling effect on the economy and the availability of financial services. And last week, I joined many of my colleagues in sending you a letter that expressed concerns that if the Federal Reserve decides to conduct a, quote, holistic review of capital standards, as we heard Senator Scott talk about earlier. So is the Federal Reserve concerned that the impact to the economy of increasing capital requirements on financial institutions at a time when inflation remains persistently high would cause an issue?
So I think it's always a balance. We know that higher capital makes banks safer and sounder. We also know that you will at the margin provide less credit the more capital you have to have. But I think it's never exactly clear that you're at the perfect equilibrium, and it's a fair question, I think, to look at that.
And I know, out of respect for the chairman and trying to stay in my time, I will just end by saying, I heard what you said. Obviously, as you have said, the Federal Reserve is not and will not be a climate policymaker. I just want to thank you for your public statement on that. I agree with you that there's a difference between policymakers and financial regulators, and certainly look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks, Senator Britt. Senator Warner from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, it's good to see you again. Let me start by saying, depending on who's asking questions, we're either pounding you for how quickly we're going to drive that inflation back to 2%, or pounding you on making sure that we don't push the economy into a recession and drive up unemployment. I got to tell you, these are maybe not the cheap seats, but I actually think you've done a pretty good job in terms of both ratcheting up rates and then starting to tail off a little bit. I think we all were concerned by the January numbers where it popped up a little bit more. I wish, Mr. Chairman, we were actually having this hearing 2 weeks from now, because we're going to have a lot more data later in this week and next week. But I want to we've still got ways to go, and the January numbers were concerning. But I do think your tailored approach, we can all second guess, but I think it has been the right approach. And I want to commend you on that. I want to get two questions in. One of the areas that I am very worried about is commercial debt. I mean, we've got a Bloomberg story here showing, we're going to hit a $6 trillion wall this year on refinancing. Where I'm particularly concerned is the issue around commercial real estate. As we recover from COVID, a lot of things are getting back to normal, but clearly the transformation of where people work is going through a fundamental transition, and I hope people do return more to the office, but lots of folks prefer working elsewhere. That's going to fundamentally change the real estate market on the commercial side, and I do believe we're going to hit potentially a cliff here of a totally unexpected problem in terms of commercial real estate. How are you looking at that issue and recognizing there's lots of bumps coming out of COVID? This one seems to be more unique in nature, and how are you thinking about that issue?
So the first one on commercial debt, business debt generally,
Gracias a los que vinieron, señores, disculpen. Fue un huevito ahí en vivo en los dos canales al mismo tiempo. Es que yo tenía el otro live stream preparado y aquí le di, no me di cuenta. Y ya tú sabes, me metí en vivo con todos.
The refinancing spike that has to happen. And I've seen those come and go before. Generally, markets can absorb them, maybe at a much higher rate this time. But it's something that we're well aware of and watching carefully. In terms of CRE, I would agree with you. The occupancy. Hay una ahí
que yo estoy esperando la pregunta de ella. Vamos a leer unas cuantas preguntas para los que acaban de llegar nuevos y dar un resumen. ¿En cuál momento nos obligaron a decir que con SIGA seremos como el... espérate. Déjame yo poner aquí. Vamos a ver.
To have quite enough housing in some places. But the question is, what's the financial stability risk? It's not great for the largest institutions don't tend to have a lot of direct exposure to that. Some smaller banks actually do. Medium and small size banks do. We carefully monitor it. We agree that that's an area that requires a lot of monitoring.
Yo entiendo que esa es una área que necesita mucho monitoreo. Y estamos en el caso.
Will morph me into my last question, something we've talked.
Mandaron dinero en el otro chat y aquí no han mandado ni un saludo, Dios mío. Guarde mi dinero cuando el precio inmobiliario baje. Airbnb 2025-2026. A ver.
The system is a heck of a lot stronger and was able to withstand COVID in a very healthy way. But what we've also seen evolve is a vast amount of financial institutions move beyond the regulatory perimeter. The fact that we now have way over half of the mortgage origination coming from non-financing institutions, because a lot of the large entities, hedge funds, other funds that may be doing some of this commercial debt or some of the CRE debt. I'd like you to talk generally in the last 40 seconds or so of, how you think about this regulatory perimeter. I'm a big believer, and I know some of my colleagues are, that, that we ought to look less at charter and look at same risk, same regulation, maybe as a guiding principle. I know Senator Warren's been working on some work. I've been working on some work around crypto around that area. But there's a vast amount of activity that's taking place outside the regulatory perimeter. How should we be thinking about that, and how do we make sure that doesn't create the kind of crisis sneak-up that happened in 2008 on the non-regulated side of the House?
I think you articulated the same activity. And all kinds of other activities. People are going to assume when they deal with something that looks like a money market fund that it has the same regulation as a money market fund or a bank deposit. And so stable coins need some attention in that respect. I just think that's the basic principle. And you're right, so much of intermediation has moved away from the regulated banks really for a long period of time. We got to keep an eye on that.
We can keep looking at it. I hope it's
Thank you, Senator Vance. I'm sorry, Senator Hagerty of Tennessee.
Thank you, Chairman Brown, and thank you very much, Ranking Member Scott, for holding this hearing. Chairman, it's great to see you again here. I appreciate your presence, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about an item that I'm particularly concerned about, and that's the holistic review that Senator Britt just brought up. That
él dijo algo del stablecoin.
Thank you, Chairman Brown.
Need some attention. People are going to assume when they deal with something that looks like a money market fund that it has the same regulation as a money market fund or a bank deposit. And
working on some work. I've been working on some work around crypto around that area. But there's a vast amount of activity that's taking place outside the regulatory perimeter. How should we be thinking about that, and how do we make sure that doesn't create the kind of...
¿Cómo debemos estar pensando? Debemos estar pensando a todo lo que estamos viendo fuera de la parte regulatoria.
I think you articulated the principle very well. It's same activity, same regulation. And that covers crypto and all kinds of other activities. People are going to assume when they deal with something that looks like a money market fund that it has the same regulation as a money market fund or a bank deposit. And so stable coins need some attention in that respect. I just think that's the basic principle. And you're right, so much of intermediation has moved away from the regulated banks really for a long period of time. And we got to keep an eye on that.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Vamos avanzar.
On an informal basis, and that's what he did. So it's only natural that someone would come in and take a fresh look, and I think that's part of the process. The role of that person is to make recommendations on regulation and supervision to the full board. The role of the board is to consider those when made. And this, to me, this just comes under that heading.
Well, as the review is underway, and I appreciate that context, one aspect of it seems to us as an apparent willingness to undo the tailoring requirements that were enacted as part of S2155. And I understand that nothing has been finalized regarding the regulations. It's a concerning prospect if that's the case. The Fed's General Counsel just yesterday alluded to...
Él dijo del stablecoin que debemos de manejarlo igual, de manejarlo con la misma legislación.
Banks that were intentionally given relief in that bill. So I want to be perfectly clear that the banking regulators themselves can't just simply ignore or selectively enforce the laws. And again, I realize that the details of the study haven't been finalized or made public, but if the proposal put forth by Vice Chair Barr is either unduly aggressive or appears to contradict the spirit of S2155, will you vote for it?
I can't answer that in the abstract, of course, but I would say we're, as an institution, very strongly committed to tailoring. And anything we do is going to reflect, tailoring of institutions according to their risk. And I mean, that's a principle that we'll stick with.
I think it's quite important, again, given the legislative intent here and the concerns that we maintain that in the face of what General Counsel said just yesterday. I appreciate your perspective in terms of keeping that in place. I'd like to come with my next question, Chairman Powell, with starting the question by underscoring the importance of the independence of the Fed's monetary policy. Right now, the economic picture is about as uncertain as I can remember. We've had large companies in the private sector who are in the midst of planning layoffs and forecasting serious economic weakness in the quarters to come. Yet, on the other hand, the current economic data seems to be robust. Inflation showed some signs of softening in the past several releases. So I just hope, Chair Powell, that you could briefly tell us how you synthesize these seemingly contradictory data.
So Just quickly, at the end of last year, we saw a couple of very promising, modest inflationary readings in November and December. But earlier this year, some of that improvement was revised away. In addition, we got a very strong reading on inflation in January, also very strong jobs reading, also very strong retail sales. And so, as I pointed out in my testimony,
afirmativo también, Bitman,
we're looking at
del
a
canal
reversal,
Aviso lo
really,
esperan a
of what
9,000,
we
así que
thought we were
fuentes
seeing to some
confiables.
extent.
¿Qué? ¿Que esperan Bitcoin a 9,000? ¿Quién? ¿Quién está esperando Bitcoin a 9,000? Dígame. Marciano, ¿tiene hambre? Ve a comer. Te ves pálido. Tengo hambre, sí.
There's not a lot of improvement yet to be seen in the...
En el canal de blog hay gente más seria y colabora con Super Chat. En el canal de finanzas hay puro niño fan de Shitcoin y Mintcoin. Deberían cambiar los nombres, Marciano.
I think nothing about the data.
No, ¿qué pasa? No.
Indeed, it suggests that we...
Jaime dice que Bitcoin se va a los 9,000. No joda.
Where and when it might happen.
Yo voy a hacer un video.
Funds rate landing.
De qué esperan los expertos. A ver, ¿qué esperan cada uno?
Individual assessments of that in December, and I think...
Y Dilo lo espera a 3,000. Yo no lo espero en ninguna parte. Yo no hago análisis de eso. Yo más veo y ya. Y yo lamentablemente yo no sé. ¿Qué verga sé yo? Deja de poner anuncios. Papi, hay que comer, papi. Yo tengo que poner anuncios porque de algo yo tengo que comer. El negocio es claro, ustedes están aquí, yo le pongo anuncios, yo no le vendo más nada. Es un anuncio nada más, señores, no es quitándole el dinero. Malo es que yo le diga, para estar aquí tienen que pagar, o para comentar tienen que pagar, como hacen otros canales. Señores.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gracias, Mr.
So the Fed has raised interest rates 8 times over the last year in what has been the most extreme rate hike cycle in 40 years. The Fed's goal is to slow inflation, and your tool, raising interest rates, is designed to slow the economy and throw people out of work. So far, you haven't tipped the economy into recession, but you haven't brought inflation entirely under control either. And maybe the reason for that is that other things are also keeping prices high, things you can't fix with high interest rates. Things like price gouging and supply chain kinks and a war in Ukraine.
Señores, mi negocio aquí es claro. Yo le doy un servicio. Yo le doy a ustedes el servicio de traducirle esto, explicarle y hablarlo. ¿Ustedes qué me dan a mí? Ver los anuncios. Ahora, si ustedes no quieren ver los anuncios, ustedes pueden pagar por el vaina, tú sabes. Yo lo pago y no me salen anuncios. Pero es un intercambio.
More than
Mira lo que me dice.
Espérate, Chair Powell, if you hit your projections, do you know how many people who are currently working, going about their lives, will lose their jobs?
Si tú sigues con tu proyección, ¿tú sabes cuánta gente va a perder el trabajo?
It's not an intended consequence.
But it is, and it's in your report.
No son
and that would be about 2 million people
2 millones de personas que van a perder su
people
trabajo.
Who are working right now, making their mortgages.
Gente que
so,
están
Chair
trabajando,
Powell, if you could speak directly to the 2 million hardworking people who have decent jobs today,
que tienen un trabajo decente,
to get fired
que tú
over the next year,
que lo voten
what would you say to them? How would you explain your view that they need to lose their jobs?
I would explain to people more broadly that inflation is extremely high and it's hurting the working people of this country badly.
Y ustedes están comprando Apple Watch Ultra.
But all of them are suffering under high inflation, and we are taking the only measures we
le quieren meter una presión al viejito. Yo tengo que hacer su seguridad.
Putting 2 million people out of work is just part of the cost, and they just have to bear it.
Y ellos solamente tienen que sufrirlo. Bueno, que ahorren.
We just walk away from our jobs and inflation remains 5-6%.
Let me ask you about what happens if you do this.
Y tú quieres que nosotros dejamos eso y soltemos y que la inflación siga comiéndonos.
In which the unemployment rate has increased by 1 percentage point within 1 year. Exactly what you're aiming to do right now.
Mandaron super chat, pero están peleando.
Did the U.S. economy avoid falling into a recession?
You know, it's not as black and white as very,
just
very
looking at the numbers.
No, Alan Blinder's written a book on this.
There have been 12 times that we've seen a 1-point increase in the unemployment rate in a year. That's exactly what your Fed report has put out as the projection and the plan based on how you're going to keep raising these interest rates. How many times did the economy fail to fall into a recession after doing that? Out of 12 times.
I think the number is 0.
I think the number is 0. That's exactly right. So then the question becomes, we've got 2 million people out of work. Can you stop it?
Tú puedes pararlo en 2 millones de personas.
History suggests that the Fed has a terrible track record of containing modest increases in the unemployment rate. Once the economy starts shedding jobs, it's kind of like a runaway train. It is really hard to stop. In fact, in 11 out of the 12 times that the unemployment rate increased by a full percentage point within 1 year, unemployment went on to rise another full percentage point on top of that. If that's what happens this time, we'd be looking at least 3.5 million people who would lose their jobs. So, Chair Powell, if you reach your goal and 2 million people get laid off by the end of this year, and then, just like in 11 out of 12 times that unemployment has risen by a point in a single year, it keeps on rising, and then we've got 2.5 million people out of work, we've got 3 million people who get laid off, we've got 3.5 million people who get laid off. What's your plan?
¿Cuál es tu maldito plan?
Well,
Ay, Dios mío.
Right now the unemployment rate is 3.4%,
el unemployment es 3.4, que hasta el más bajito de 50 años.
A sharp or enormous increase in unemployment to get inflation under control.
I'm looking at your projections. Do you call laying off 2 million people this year not a sharp increase in unemployment?
4.5%.
Explain that to the 2 million families who are going to be out of work.
We're not targeting any of that, but I would say
Mira, even
4.5% unemployment is well better than most of the time for the last 75 years.
In other words, you don't have a plan to stop a runaway train if it occurs. Chair Powell, you are gambling with people's lives, and there's a pile of data showing the price gouging and supply chain kinks and the war in Ukraine are driving up prices. You cling to the idea that there's only one solution: lay off millions of workers. We need a Fed that will fight for families, and if you're not going to lead that charge, we need someone at the Fed who will.
Senator Vance of Ohio.
Oh my God, necesitamos a un tipo que venga a luchar por la familia. Si tú no puedes hacer ese trabajo, te tienes que ir a limpiar baño. Oh my God. Oh, lo mató. Oh, le dio más duro que como yo le di al sensei. Oh.
Where I now have the honor of representing all of Ohio.
Oh my
and, you know, one of the things that you hear...
Jerome Powell va a tener que hacer como el sensei. Va a tener que... va a tener que subir video gratis.
Possessing a resource curse, right? So there's a lot of coal in Central Appalachia.
No, que si a ti no te interesan la familia, que si yo qué. Ok, Mark Laver dice... Hace un video explicando por qué Maverick es un estafador para que la gente entienda por qué no deben de apoyarlo. La estafa que hizo con el juego NFT. Señores, yo he hecho varios videos sobre eso. Y puedo hacer uno diciendo por qué yo no quiero que me asocien con él. La verdad de Master Maverick. Míralo aquí, mi opinión sobre... Ah, no, pero este no es sobre la estafa que él hizo. Tengo que ver porque mi video no sale. Tengo que ver cómo lo hago porque mi video no sale. Pero yo tengo él hizo una estafa, bro. Él hizo una estafa a lo claro. A lo claro. Y por eso que yo no quiero que me asocien con él de ninguna manera, de ninguna forma. Dame ver.
I do. Now, this has obviously been great for American purchasing power.
Hay otro que mandó $5. Marciano, el video del sensei que tiene pendiente tiene un video viejo en la descripción. Sí, porque yo puse algo ahí para que la gente lo vaya viendo mientras tanto.
You can argue that the reserve currency status is a massive subsidy to American consumers, but a massive tax on American producers. Now, I know the strong dollar is sort of a sacred cow of the Washington consensus, but when I survey the American economy and I see our mass consumption of mostly useless imports on the one hand and our hollowed out industrial base on the other hand, I wonder if the reserve currency status also has some downsides and not just some upsides as well. And let me just put a final point on this, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Chairman Powell. We're, of course, now the main supporter of a massive land war in Europe between the Russians and the Ukrainians. I read recently, and I'm not going to comment on how perfect or precise these estimates are, but I read recently that the United States is trying to ramp up production from 14,000 artillery shells to 20,000 artillery shells. That's per month, while the Russians are firing 20,000 artillery shells in Ukraine per day. And when I look at the American economy, we have a lot of financial engineers and a lot of diversity consultants. We don't have a lot of people making things. And I worry that the reserve currency status and the lack of control we have over our currency is perhaps driving that. I'd love to get your feedback on that. What are the upsides and downsides of the reserve currency?
That's a big question to try to answer.
You have 2 minutes, today. Chairman Powell, so plenty of time.
I can't even get started on that. So we are the world's reserve currency, of course. And
somos la moneda mundial, la reserva de moneda mundial. Esto es sobre guerra. Esto es más sobre guerra.
Control over inflation over many years. The world trusts.
El enemigo de tu enemigo es tu amigo. Debe unirte a Maverick para combatir a Salomón para que estafen a millones. Luego el trabajo se vuelven a dar con Maverick. Anders, yo no necesito a Maverick para atacar a Salomundo. Ya yo hice mi video y yo lo que me preocupo es por lo que me siguen y ya. ¿Entiendes? Yo me voy a preocupar por lo que me siguen. Yo no me voy a asociar a Maverick porque Maverick ha estafado gente. ¿Entiendes? A lo legal ha estafado gente. Y vende curso igual de $350. Entonces yo no me puedo unir a Maverick, ni me voy a unir. Olvídense de eso.
It's not a permanent one, rather. So there isn't any obvious candidate to replace the United States right now where you can have free flow of capital in and out of the country, where you can really trust the rule of law and democratic institutions, and keeping price stability, which you can here.
Do you think it gives us less control over our own currency, the fact that it's become the world's reserve?
No negociamos con terroristas ni estafadores.
Or currency. I'm not sure. So essentially what we try to control is price stability. And no, it doesn't make it harder for us to keep inflation under control. The United States has a smaller external sector than most large economies, where it's only about 15%. So mainly what affects inflation in the United States is domestic supply and demand.
Do you think it makes it harder for us to to fight back against currency manipulation, to control the export and import flows in a way that stabilizes our own manufacturing sector?
Well, I mean, what's important there is really the level of the dollar. And, when the dollar is stronger, obviously our price,
el nivel del dólar, que el dólar sea más fuerte.
Abroad and that kind of thing. But we don't have an opinion on.
No tenemos una opinión.
Matters of the level of the dollar really matters for the Treasury Department and the elected government, not for the Fed.
Thank you, Chairman Powell.
Thank you, Senator Vance. Senator Van Hollen of Maryland's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, thank you for being here and for your service.
¿Quién aquí está interesado en invertir en el fondo de Salomundo? Déjame ver.
I think basic yes or no's and then some longer questions. Would you agree that changes in the size of corporate profits can be one of the factors that affects the inflation rate?
Yes.
Right. Now, recently we saw that the Employment Cost Index, which, as you know, measures the growth of wages and benefit costs, grew at roughly 4% on an annualized basis in the fourth quarter of 2022. Is that right?
That's my recollection, yes.
So if corporate profits were to decline from the extremely high levels that we saw recently, would it be possible to sustain the 4% growth rate in the Employment Cost Index?
Okay, le estaban haciendo la misma pregunta. El psicólogo del trading y Capello se asociaron y abrieron una academia, sala de trading en vivo. Hicieron una carrera hablando mal de otros y abren el chiringuito. No, el Capello es duro.
Wouldn't be able to sustain 4% wage inflation over the longer
term. No inviertan en cosas de YouTubers, exactamente, ni en lo que yo le traiga. Vamos a ver, hay un 15%. Voten con la verdad.
Is that right in the short term?
Well, so I think wages affect prices and prices affect wages. I think we do think that some softening in labor market conditions
Antes compro Chiva, que ese fondo
will
de
happen as we try to get inflation under control, and will need to happen.
Right, but that's more a prediction about your efforts to fight inflation. Are you saying that simply looking at the current 4% growth rate in the short term is an excuse for jacking up interest rates?
Es una excusa para,
no, what I would say is that the overall, all the data we look at in the labor market, including not just that measure of wages, but others also, employment, also participation, also job openings and quits and things like that. All of that, you put that.
Exacto, Anders, no confíen en nadie, bro, ni en mí confíen en verdad, ni en mí.
Solo
de corazón, no, aquí ya no puede confiar en nadie.
Inflation. I've never said it was the main cause.
Right. I think the larger point here, based on your response to that first question about growth in profits, is corporations have a decision as to whether or not they're going to pocket more for profit, which they can, or provide higher wages to their employees. And if you actually lowered your profit margins, you could sustain a higher wage increase without violating the 2% inflation. Isn't that right?
Yes. I mean, when I hear profit margins, what we're seeing in the economy is pretty much about shortages and supply chain blockages. And when there's not enough of a product, what happens, and there's a lot of demand, what you see is prices going up. As the supply chains get fixed and shortages are alleviated, you will see inflation coming down. You'll see margins coming down. And that will certainly help with inflation.
Es en vivo, ya terminó. Ya no estamos en vivo. Esto es grabado ahora, bro.
That means that even with the increase of costs because of supply chains, they're making more profits. Which again, that they can do that. But my point is that as a contributor to inflation, as you indicated in response to the first question, let me ask you about the tight labor market because one of the issues in a tight labor market is parents with kids, including a lot of moms who would like to go back into the market but are not able to do so because of lack of affordable child care. The other issue is immigration, and I know that you've gotten some recent data on how some immigration figures actually have softened a little bit the tightness in the labor market. Can you just talk broadly about those two factors, affordable child care and immigration, more legal immigration, and how they could affect labor force participation and therefore also reduce inflation pressures?
So on the first, we don't make recommendations or evaluate fiscal policy, but I will say there's research that shows that it helps keep women in the workforce when there's child care available, which is, I think, kind of self-evident. The second was
impact of immigration.
Yeah. So what I talked about with you is actually as part of the January Bureau of Labor Statistics report, which comes the employment report for January, which comes out in early February. There is a section in there about more people. The Census Department has increased its estimate of the workforce by something like 870,000. And a significant part of that has been immigration. And that has moved up participation by a little bit, and it may be part of why we're hearing. It may be part of why we're hearing from in the labor market that the really intense labor shortage pressures that we were hearing about in 2021 and 22 may be alleviating. So that would contribute to that. Clearly, more people. Clearly, the economy is calling for more people with essentially two job openings for every unemployed person, and this can be a source of those people.
Right, and that would reduce the tightness of the labor market and reduce pressures on inflation, right?
May already be doing so.
Thank you.
Senator Kramer of North Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Powell, for being here. And I can't resist responding to a few things that my friends on the left have said. For example, in his opening statement, Chairman Brown had a long list of things that raising interest rates won't do. Raising interest rates won't fill in the blank. I'm going to fill in the blank with a couple things. How about raising interest rates won't stop Senate Democrats and President Biden from overtaxing, overspending, overborrowing, overregulating. Chairman Brown said we should rebuild our supply chain by curbing offshoring, corporate offshoring. I agree. He talked a lot about corporate greed contributing to inflation. Okay. But how about regulatory greed contributing to corporate greed? How do you expect corporations to reinvest money if you overregulate their ability to invest that money right here in the United States of America? You want to onshore some things? How about energy policy? How about instead of looking to Venezuela or Iran for oil supply or Russia, than looking to China for electric
Los republicanos están con Jerome Powell. Los demócratas son los que están atacando a Jerome Powell.
We have a strategy that onshores those things by reducing regulation, reducing taxes, letting those corporations reinvest their profits rather than reinviertan esas ganancias en vez de darlo a nosotros. O tener que hacer trucos. This idea that somehow the Federal Reserve is supposed to keep inflation in check while half of the government works against it is mind-boggling. Now, I know, Mr. Chairman, you don't like to comment on policy. You and I have been around and around about this. You were anxious to advise us to spend lots of money during the pandemic. I don't think a lot of people blame you for that. You wouldn't respond to efforts by the Biden administration after we were in a robust recovery from not spending so much money. Okay, I can appreciate the change. But now we're in this debate between Republicans and Democrats, between particularly the House Speaker and the President, on how to raise the debt ceiling. And you've made some pretty strong comments about raising the debt ceiling, absent from structural reforms that would actually help us get back to a reasonable growth. And so I warn you again, if you're going to make political comments, if you're going to advise us on policy, be consistent with it. Now, I want to get back to the greening of the Federal Reserve.
Sea persistente, que sea consistente.
Whatever we call them. But I'm concerned that now the Federal Reserve is starting down this path. Maybe it's slightly at first about climate stress testing. I just want to ask you this. If we're going to go down that path, if the Federal Reserve is now going to become part of the federal climate police force, are we going to consider the ramifications of having entire communities and economies, factories and manufacturers, whatever, energy entities, large server farms, leaving them susceptible to a very unreliable, very expensive energy source? Is that part of the stress test?
No, those are considerations for elected people, not for us.
Ustedes están entendiendo esto, señores. Hay un lado,
but it's a real role.
Hay un lado de republicanos y demócratas. Es una lucha de poder.
Start doing stress tests for the 6 largest financial institutions related to climate, which really is more weather than climate. Then are we going to consider the effects of an unreliable energy source at several locations throughout our country?
So our only focus is on the safety and soundness of these institutions, and do they understand and can they manage all of the risks that they run in their business model. That's our only goal. We're not looking to be climate policymakers. Climate policy is clearly going to have effects on regions, on companies, on individuals, on countries, disparate effects, and that is not for unelected people like us who have a narrow mandate. But I think it does touch climate, and you're right to be concerned that we find ourselves on a slippery slope. But honestly, I think the climate scenarios are something that the banks are already doing and themselves, and the climate guidance is something that they're looking for. They want to know how we're thinking about this, but we will try really hard not to get on a slippery slope and find ourselves becoming climate policymakers. It's just not appropriate for an independent agency.
Okay. And I completely agree, and I hope you stick to that. And I think you ought to, ask the banks to consider what the overreaction might, what kind of vulnerabilities that might expose. With that, with regard to what Senator Warren was saying on her monologue, one thing about ideologues, they have the luxury of binary choices. You have a really big job, and you have a single, in my mind, one and a half, maybe two missions. I think the first one handles the second one okay.
Este pobre hombre me lo están atacando tanto. Un hombre que gana $190,000 al año y sufre tanto con todo viejito.
Senator Tester of Montana is recognized.
Chair Powell, thank you for being here today, and thank you for serving in this critical role at this critical time. I have talked many times in this committee.
Mira cómo lo tienen ahí. Mira cómo lo tienen ahí. Da pena, míralo, 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 míralo.
Of the Fed's independence. I said it in the previous administration. I say it now. We cannot be playing politics with our economy.
No podemos jugar política con la economía.
From a climate standpoint, I would just tell you it's entirely artificial right now anyway, because if you look at the hundreds of billions of dollars this country puts out every year in disasters due to climate instability, we ought to be asking our question, is that sustainable? Because quite frankly, it has to be done, and I don't think it's sustainable. So we've got to start looking for some solutions on the climate side sooner rather than later. The Reserve has a tough job, and I really appreciate how you've done it. Reasonable, working together, making hard decisions for the good of the economy. We have to get this right. So the question is, how much has inflation decreased since its peak?
It depends on the measure, but it's meaningfully, at least a couple percentage points.
Okay, and has unemployment gone down as inflation has gone down?
Unemployment has gone down. Yes, it has, to now a 54-year low.
Yes. So the question becomes, and I always think back to in 1998, I bought some property, and the interest on that property was 10% in 1998, and I thought I got a hell of a deal, by the way. I thought it was just great.
Wow.
But the truth is interest rates have been artificially low for the last, 20 years, probably?
And
the question becomes, as you look at the economy and as you try to make the determination whether the inflation is caused by demand or supply, where does all that fall in to your decision-making moving forward?
Well, you mean the level of interest rates. So in theory, there's this thing called the neutral level of interest, and we know it only by its works. And neutral is the level that neither pushes the economy up nor pulls it down. And it changes over time. This is the thing about these important variables in economics. So what's happened until now was that the neutral level of interest went down and down and down to the point where...
Bueno, señor, hay un 20% que tiene la curiosidad de estar en ese fondo de inversiones de Salomón.
Pandemic, and we have rates at 4.5%, our policy rate. And we have the labor market very strong and inflation reacting somewhat, and it does raise the question of where's the neutral rate. Honestly, we don't know. I think we look at the current situation and we see that there's not a lot of evidence hard to make a case that we've over-tightened. It means we need to continue to tighten. I think we're very mindful of the lags with which our policy works. We don't think we need a significant increase in unemployment, and we're certainly not aiming for one. But we do think there'll be some softening in labor market conditions to get to 2% inflation.
Sí, ellos están seguros de que sí necesitan
when you're looking at
que se suavice.
I know we talk about energy prices here and the price of gasoline, and then if you go over and Europe is much, much higher. Are we comparable? I'm just curious. Are we comparable with our interest rates here as with, say, Europe?
We're very close to where Canada is. We're a little bit higher than where Europe is. Europe's traditionally had much lower inflation. They now have very high inflation, and they're still increasing rates, but they're a bit lower in terms of rates.
So if we do not get the inflation under control, and like I said, I think the steps you've taken have been reasonable and measured. If we don't get it under control, what are the impacts of that?
Well, the social costs of failure is one way to think about it, are very, very high. So if inflation were to continue, at some point that will become the psychology. That will make it more self-perpetual.
Dice David Manani, Powell debe de aplicar la táctica de Deluxe. De los
capital allocation.
De mostrar muchas flechitas y si no se cumple puede decir que está manipulado.
Stability firmly back at 2% so that we can have the kind of strong labor market for a sustained period that we had before.
Once again, thank you for your work. Thank you for your independence. Senator Daines.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tester. I'll be handing off to Senator Cortez Masto when I'm finished up as well. So,
cuando que Salomundo vendió 20 millones de Golem, así que creo que más que algunos aquí compraron Golem
back in
de un
Montana,
YouTuber. Toda esa reunión abrieron
certainly
posiciones.
Across the state is the high cost of gas, the high cost
Cayendo
of groceries,
Chiva
and
Inu, ¿qué
overall how
pasó?
their paychecks are shrinking because of inflation. It's a crushing blow. It has real-life impacts. It's a top-of-mind issue for Montanans. It's also important to note the devastating impact it's going to have on our nation's economic future. In fact, in October of last year, I sent a letter to Congressional Budget Office Director Swagel.
¿Qué está pasando con Chiva, señores?
And the elevated interest rates would have on the cost of servicing the federal debt. His response painted a less than rosy picture. But then we got the CBO's updated 10-year baseline forecast in February, and it confirmed the truly dire situation that we find ourselves in. Driven by interest payments on the debt,
una caída bacana,
CBO now projects that cumulative...
Ay, mi chivita, Marciano, muchos dicen que compraron golems al principio por ti y perdieron plata.
Washington. But the cumulative deficits during the 10-year window
lo mismo que toda la moneda.
Ay, $1 trillion. The cumulative deficit, not talking the debt, because it's going to grow the total federal debt.
Vamos a ver, señores, ya esto me está aburriendo, así que vamos a ver con la pregunta.
By 2033.
Háganme reír. Salomundo va a mudar la oficina para aprovechar más Dubai. Solo la empresa, no por otra cosa. Basta de chiva, Marciano.
Very, very quickly. Within 5 years, we're going to spend...
Le robaron a Salomundrin
on national defense. You think about that for a moment. And these are coming out of the CBO. These absolutely shocking, but quite frankly, predictable projections.
Creo que le hace falta eso a la gente que para que no caigan en estafa.
Remember,
yo lo hago, bro.
Lawrence Summers, of course, the former Secretary of Treasury under President Clinton, economic advisor.
Forex sin límite me pregunta que dónde me pueden.
He said,
yo voy a escuchar, Forex sin límite me dice, ¿dónde te podemos hacer llegar las denuncias? Bro, por Twitter, por Telegram, por aquí, tú me puedes decir, Marciano, ¿tú conoces tal caso? Y yo lo comento. Cuando un video de Newman, que ya murió su token, de 100 a 20 en 6 días, no mames. Murió esa verga ya.
So I certainly hope the president's budget, which we expect to see later this week, will propose pro-growth policies.
Vamos a ver, murió esa verga. ¿Quién se metió en esa verga?
Almost an existential crisis as we look at what's going to come at us here, of course, in the next 10 years with debt and service on that debt.
¿Cómo se llama? Beats.
Unfortunately, as the president said in the State of the Union address, the president says he's going to raise taxes. That's a recipe for disaster.
Wow, $19. Oh, mira eso. La metió a $100 el marico. Y mira ahora en $10, $19.
You're raising interest rates.
Es todo joda, Marciano. Sabemos que le diste hasta los zapatos a Salomón. Broker mexicano, incluyendo fondos, educación, y se robaron todos. ¿Cómo así? Mira eso. ¿Quién se mete en esa verga?
Borrowing costs. Is that correct?
Oh my God, mira eso. Chiva Inu, Chiva CEO. Ay, Dios mío.
Inflation was sparked. One of the big reasons.
Sí le robaron NFT. Ayer lo vendió y su invitado que lo hackearon y le robaron al sabelotodo. ¿Cómo así que le robaron? ¿Cómo así que le robaron? Explíquenme eso.
Which is we see the threats of China, threats around the world. I think it's very, very concerning.
Explíquenme eso, señores. Ok, Rolando, explícame eso.
More and more as you look forward. I want to change here and talk about American energy. When the war in Ukraine broke out.
Ok, hablando de la energía en América. Salomundo va a mudar sus oficinas a las Bahamas. Vale, que eso. Dilos es el mejor contradictor. Los fondos de las cuentas de las personas. Conozco un youtuber que mi pueblo promocionaba a mi amigo, pero lamentablemente la gente no le cree mucho y el tipo comprando con estafas. ¿Cómo así que a Salomundo le robaron? Bro, ¿qué opina de Gamium? Gamium, no, yo hice un video de Gamium. ¿Dónde lo veo el video de Salomundo que le robaron? Vengo del canal de blog. Saludos, Jim. Creo que al menos lo que llevamos tiempo sabemos que Pump and Dump, el que aprovechó, dice Gabriel. El Sensei y Yeribel son novios. Hay fotos. De la estafa de Quantum no se hablaba, Marciano. ¿Qué hay nuevo con Quantum? La gente vendiendo. ¿A qué precio? Price. ¿Dónde está lo de Salomundo que le robaron? Powell.
100 years. And a Latino has never served on the Federal Reserve Board. And I know there are many strong Latino economists and economic experts who would capably serve. So I want to put that out there. Chairman Powell, I also sit on Senate Finance. Right across the way, we are talking about affordable housing. I think for purposes of so many of us across the country, including in Nevada, when we talk about affordable housing, it's also about workforce housing. It's about making sure families that are working so hard have an opportunity to keep a roof over their head. Right now in Nevada, if you're making minimum wage, you have to work 75 hours a week just to be able to afford housing. And so I want to talk to you about this. I was distressed to see in the report that that activity in the housing sector has contracted as a result of the elevated mortgage rate, and you've been talking about that. I often hear from Nevadans who say, I don't know if I'm ever going to own a home, and many feel resigned being stuck in a cycle of renting. So, Chairman, how do the Federal Reserve economists and leaders think about the balance between keeping interest rates low to spur that affordable home building and home buying while addressing inflation?
We have a dual mandate from Congress, as you well know, which is maximum employment and price stability. And that's really what we take into account.
Exacto. Seguimos con Jerome Powell.
And of course, interest-sensitive spending is the thing that gets the most support when we cut rates and the thing that is most affected when we raise rates. And that means housing to a significant extent. That's not a choice that we make. That's just the way it works. And we only have really one tool, which is monetary policy. So, you know, we don't really try to use our tools to affect broader housing policy, but really just to achieve our statutory goals.
It happens to just unfortunately be in effect as you try to achieve your statutory goal. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I want to have you have the opportunity to address Senator Warren's conversation with you earlier about the tools that you have and the impact it has on causing potentially more people to be unemployed, and this obviously has an impact on their ability to afford homes as well. Can you address that?
No, el video eso fue un error que yo hice. Eso fue un error, señores. Yo voy a hacer un live stream hoy. Estoy hablando con un grupo de traders para ver si hacemos un live stream hoy a las 4 p.m. ¿Ok?
Increase in unemployment. Also, you're starting from such a strong labor market. It seems as though you're a long way.
Es que la pregunta ya son muy similares, señores.
Just looking at the labor market by itself. So, honestly, we don't know that there will need to be a really significant downturn. Other business cycles had quite different backstories than this one, and we're going to have to find out whether that matters or not. But I do think that I've said all along, and my colleagues and I have too, that we believe that we can. There's a path to restoring 2% inflation with less significant effects on the labor market than have typically been seen in downturns.
And for purposes of the general public, the people, Nevadans that I know that are struggling, we have one of the highest, we've talked about this, and thank you for always being willing to talk with me. We have one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. Our service sector was hit so hard. We're still at over 5% just in southern Nevada. We have high gas prices. We have grocery prices. We have housing prices that are high. So one of the things that you have commented on, and you just did again, but I know it was in your opening remarks, that, and it's quoted right here, and let me just say, you say our overarching focus.
Joker, tú eres fanático del sensei, tú eres uno de los zombies del sensei. Bro, ¿cómo tú me vas a decir que no investigué si le mostré los recibos y toda la vaina de que él vendía a Alamín por $200 al mes? ¿Tú sabes lo que es eso? $214 al mes. Y él se quiere pintar como un angelito, que él no vende nada. Si es mentira lo que yo estoy diciendo, que me demande. Si es mentira lo que yo estoy diciendo del sensei, que me demande, porque él y yo estamos aquí en los Estados Unidos, para que yo demostrarle, mira, oye, el sensei se le pasa por la mente de que demandame, y yo hago 10 grupos con 10 gente, de toda la gente que él le vendió la mierda de lo que él le vendió. Y voy con toda esa gente para la corte y digo, mira, ok, y él obligó a la gente a comprarlo. Ahí es que está la vaina, ahí es que está la excusa de los estafadores, eso mismo decían de mantequilla. Él no obligó a nadie. Él no obligó a nadie.
Which we had for many years.
Es el cuento que dicen todos los estafadores. Él no obligó a nadie.
Adopted it in 2012.
Lo mareó. Oíste, pero ahorita vamos a hablar del sensei. Vamos a hacer un live stream en mi canal de vlogs. Si no me siguen en mi canal de vlogs, búsquenlo, suscríbanse.
At convenient moments. So we think it's really
no le hagas caso. El sensei le lavó el cerebro a todos los ignorantes sin personalidad. Él nunca dijo que era 100% rentable. El Alamín so que la gente aprenda la realidad del trading. Oye, para que la gente aprenda la realidad del trading. Diablo, pero Joker, qué ridículo, loco. Oh my God.
Thank you. I notice my time is up. Thank you so much, Senator. Senator Lamas.
Ok, nada. El token de Newman llegó a 300 por fin. Nunca. Oye eso, el Joker. Oh my God. Bro, despierta ese sueño.
And seeking that 2%
2%
number.
Inflación.
Are you
considerando
cost of borrowing for the United States, knowing that Congress has over borrowed and that we have overspent and that the national debt is at now at least
No, yo no lo baneo, yo lo dejo ahí que hablen. Espérate,
and that we're going to face challenges of our own making. This is not about what the Fed has done. This is what about the Congress has done that you have to factor in to your decisions. Do you think about the costs of borrowing for the United States itself?
No, we do not, and we're not going to. In other words, that would be fiscal dominance. If we were, constrained in our monetary policy by the budgetary situation of the United States, and we're not. We're clearly not. The path we're on is not sustainable, but the level of debt that we have is not unsustainable. Is sustainable. Put it that way. So we don't think about interest costs when we make monetary policy. We think about maximum employment and price stability.
It's your opinion that the level of debt we have is sustainable?
Yes. I mean, we have the largest economy in the world. We can service this debt. That's not the problem. The problem is that we're on a path where the debt is growing substantially faster than the economy. And that's kind of by
usted tiene rabo de paja porque usted casi también el Dragonari y perdí $3,000. Bueno, bro, imagínate. $3,000 con Dragonari. Yo perdí con Dragonari 10,000. Yo perdí con Dragonari 10,000.
The formula.
Thank you. I'm going to switch to stable coins. You're a member of the President's Working Group on Financial Markets.
Stable coins.
The working group called for bank-like regulation of stable coins in late 2021. Then, on January 3rd of this year, in a joint staff statement, the federal banking agencies stated that even after the bank's capital, BSA, AML, and risk management, a bank issuing a stable coin on a, quote, open, public, or decentralized network is highly likely to be inconsistent with safe and sound banking practices.
Con la práctica de banco.
Say that again.
Yo voy a decirlo otra vez.
Even after a bank's capital, BSA, AML, and risk management, a bank issuing a stablecoin on an open, public, or decentralized network is highly likely to be inconsistent with safe and sound banking practices. So I'm a little confused about where we're heading on stablecoins. Does the January 3rd statement mean that the Fed has decided that stablecoins on a permissionless distributed ledger have no place in
que no
banks?
Tienen lugar en el banco? Eso es lo que tú quisiste decir.
I think that there are real concerns about permissionless public blockchains, and the reason is that they've been so susceptible to fraud, to money laundering, and all of those things. So I think what you heard from the federal banking agencies in one of their reports was that they would tend to look at those as not consistent with safety and soundness.
And what about properly regulated stablecoins? Do you think they could have a place in our banking system?
I certainly think that in a world of appropriate regulation, where the same activity, where stablecoin activity gets the same regulation as comparable products in different places, then there certainly could be a place for stablecoins in our financial services sector.
The European Union, UK, Australia, Switzerland, Singapore, and others have all moved over the last few years to create a legislative framework for digital assets. The European Union in particular is attempting to be a standard setter again, like it was with its data protection rule. Is the United States in danger of being a rule taker, not a rule maker when it comes to digital assets?
I do think it would be important for us to have a workable legal framework around digital activities. I think that is important and something Congress, in principle, needs to do, because we can't really do that.
Senator Gillibrand and I agree with you. One area we've already seen is in the Basel Committee on Bank Supervision. They propose prudential treatment for crypto assets framework, setting forth banks' capital standards for digital assets. The Basel Committee's framework does not impose a capital charge for digital asset custody, whereas the SEC's Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 imposes a prohibitive capital charge through the back door and places consumers at risk in bankruptcy. Similarly, the Basel Committee framework allows banks to issue or hold digital assets on their balance sheet if the requisite capital is set aside. So back to January 3rd, 23, the Fed and other bank regulators have said that it is forbidden for a U.S. bank to conduct these activities no matter the capital. So my question is, what does the rest of the world know about digital asset regulation that we do not, that the Fed does not?
So as we discussed, this is an SEC staff accounting bulletin.
¿Por qué los Estados Unidos traen eso?
¿Le
bajo el audio a ellos?
Comment directly on it.
The issue is, and what concerns me, is that the Fed and other federal banking agencies are not following international norms on digital asset regulation.
Lo que se está moviendo con las regulaciones. Ese es mi
Thank
comentario.
you, Chairman Powell, for being
El comentario de eso, como que los Estados Unidos se está quedando atrás con las regulaciones.
Well, thank you. And Chair Powell, it looks as if Senator Britt and I are the last people standing at this committee hearing. Thank you for passing on the
Gracias por pasar por aquí. Qué simpática ella.
Senator Lummis. And I want to thank you for your service and for our recent conversation. And before
Le bajó un poquito ahí.
I would just like to note there's been a good back and forth in the committee. Some of the big economic challenges and opportunities that we face in this country. And I would just like to note that the programs and the spending that the ranking member and some of our colleagues have blamed for inflation provided critical relief that kept working families and small businesses afloat during a global pandemic. And in fact, many of these policies were passed on a bipartisan basis and signed into law by both Republican and Democratic presidents. And I also just want to add that the laws that the Democrats passed to lower prescription drug costs and healthcare costs and to lower energy costs for Americans are helping to lower basic costs for families, all of which, by the way, was fully paid for. So I return, Mr. Chair, to what you have said to me in solutions to find a path forward. And in fact, Senator Lummis and I were just talking about this yesterday when it came to housing policy. So just want to put that out there. You and I spoke yesterday briefly.
Tenía que bajar el volumen, no bajar el directo. Salomundo ataca, solo viejos dinosaurios. Salomundo puso su cuenta de Twitter privada y después la quitó de privada. Está teniendo problemas Salomondrín, ¿verdad? Este potente estafador y su familia y sus cuentas, pregúntale cómo va su certificado digital de vacunación no oficial y sus NFT, o su robo de 250,000 BNB, un ratrero loco grande, un enfermo mega bipolar. ¡Oh! ¿Qué es esto? Hay un chisme. En este hermoso domingo le quiero mandar un saludo a toda la gente que viene a Twitter a mentar madres, a gente más exitosa que ellos. Bueno, pero él puso domingo. Sin insultos, que tengo mi corazón en pedazos. País de residencia no autorizado. Amigo, lo que va a quedar hecho pedazo de tu bolsillo como inviertas en este señor. Usted escogió esa cosa. Cuidado, ahí tu bolsillo sí va a quedar roto, pero de verdad. Yo voté por Petro Gustavo, no por su... Ok. Este potente estafador y su familia con sus cuentas, pregúntales cómo va su certificado digital de vacunación no oficial. What the fridge? Es que con su problema mental el 50% del tiempo. ¿Y por qué? Pero Salomundo le responde a este, pero a mí no me responde nada. ¿Cuántos seguidores tiene este? 236 seguidores. Métete con uno de tu tamaño, Salo. Y sí responde él. ¿Qué pasó, mi Salo? ¿Quieres escapar para ti todo el mercado de las estafas? Deja que otros también estafen y ganen algo. Tío Salo, ¿crees que es el momento de comprar estafador igual que tú? Qué pena ajena apoyar a Petro. Oye, cambiando la conversación, eso es un argumento de cambio de conversación.
Wait till after I'm fully...
Que yo te diga a ti estafador y tú vengas, no, que tú votaste por Petro o que tú no te pones la vacuna. Eso es una falacia. Déjame yo preguntarle
with Mr. Barr and just appreciate that.
Es una falacia.
My view of this is that climate change and the economy are inextricably linked, and the reality is that climate-related action.
Joker, mándale mensaje al sensei, porfa. A Salomundo se le cayó todo, va en picada. A ver.
I was wondering if you would just be willing to update us briefly on some of the next steps that the Fed is going to be looking at as you evaluate the resilience of financial institutions to, with respect to climate risk. There's this pilot project that just was started.
Mira lo que hizo Salomundo. Mira. ¿Cómo se llama? ¿Cómo se llama la falacia cuando yo te ataco a ti y no a tus argumentos? Yo digo, un youtuber le están diciendo que su fondo de inversión es una estafa y él responde diciendo que la persona votó por un candidato presidencial corrupto y que no se ha vacunado. Una vaina así, ¿verdad? Estaría él haciendo una falacia. Vamos a ver. Yo le escribo mal y ella me entiende. Hombre de paja. No creo que sea el hombre de paja. Mi bro, quiero que sepa, ¿será que se puede mandar mensaje mencionando al sensei? ¿Será que se puede mandar mensaje mencionando al sensei? El sensei está en vivo ahora. Comenzó un en vivo ahora. Después de que yo mira, se llama, la falacia que describe se llama ad hominem, que significa contra la persona en latín. Esta falacia se comete cuando se ataca al carácter o a la personalidad de alguien. en lugar de abordar directamente sus argumentos o afirmaciones. El sensei está en vivo ahora.
Our policies almost right away. And the poster child for that is housing. And so you've seen mortgage rates now go up, back up over 6%. You've seen housing starts come down, activity.
Después de que yo me lo violé, ahora está dando clase que él vendía, la está dando gratis. Mira, mira, clase bien organizada. La misma clase que él vendía, señores, la misma clase que él vendía, la está dando gratis ahora, fíjate.
Housing inflation, which is a big part of the CPI, a little bit smaller part of the PCE.
Mira, mira, desactivó el chat. Ya tú sabes por qué, ¿verdad? Porque se lo están cogiendo. Ay, hombre, yo le voy a hacer una reacción a eso. Hombre de paja, Marciano, un día dijiste que estudiaste falacia en la universidad. ¿Qué pasó aquí? No, no es hombre de paja, se llama ad hominem. Pero yo me la sé, yo lo único que le pregunté a ella. ¿Cuál es la diferencia entre Dragonari y el Sensei? Que Dragonari fue un proyecto que fracasó. Y el Sensei es alguien que está literalmente engañando a la gente. No hay una gran diferencia ahí. Nadie ha acusado a la gente de Dragonari de estafa, o sea, pero aquí es diferente. Vamos a ver.
A belief, I don't want to misquote them, but a belief that we have too little capital in the banking sector. Maybe true of a couple of banking institutions, but how do you feel about the current capital that our broader banking sector, irrespective of where they are in size? What concerns, if any, do you have about the capital that we see out there already?
Yo creo que voy a ir en vivo para el otro canal. ¿Qué ustedes creen, tío Marciano? El sensei, cada que tú lo mencionas, se va en vivo. Va a entrar al fondo. Son 50,000 que se hace rápido. Wow.
I think the new vice chair is doing what new vice chairs do, which is to take a fresh look and ask the question.
Joker, yo estoy pensando que tú eres el sensei. ¿Tú sabes por qué yo no pienso que tú eres el sensei? Porque tú estás aquí en el en vivo y él está en vivo en el mismo tiempo. Oíste, la falacia del hombre de paja, o straw man en inglés, es un error lógico que consiste en tergiversar o exagerar los argumentos o posiciones. Ay, Marciano, yo que defienda a un estafador. Ad hominem se llama. Está desesperado. ¿Ustedes creen que él hizo esta clase? Esta clase era la misma que él daba. Mira, le voy a mostrar. Está desesperado el sensei, mira. La clase que esa clase él la vendía por $260. Mira. ¿Dónde está? Esa misma clase le voy a enseñar aquí. Míralo ahí. Mira eso. $258. Cojan esa clase que se la están dando gratis. Míralo ahí cómo él la cobraba. Manual de vías. Míralo ahí mismo. Se registraron 1,200 personas. ¿Cómo ustedes ven eso? ¿Ustedes ven eso como un éxito o como un fracaso? Dijo que se sentía muy bien haciendo nuevamente estos lives. Lo acaba de decir. Sí, yo lo estoy oyendo. Yo creo que vamos a dejar a Jerome Powell y yo voy a preparar otro live stream para venir a montárnosle un live stream encima del live stream de él. ¿Qué ustedes creen?
Risk associated with their business focus. Does that make sense?
To your earlier point, though,
¿qué pasa con el internet de Marciano? ¿Qué pasó?
As amended, actually requires that we take those things into consideration. So we certainly will. We will.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Warnock is recognized from Georgia.
Thank you so very much,
Vamos a ver si hay
Chairman.
algo más.
Before I begin my questions,
I know that this committee will soon consider a new nominee to serve on the Federal
Habla en este live, Marciano, no cambies de live. No, yo voy a ir porque este live tiene un título y una vaina. Ojo, recuerden que lo que dije en los videos, Salo, eso sí fue puro fraude, pero siempre quitó los comentarios. Marciano, ¿viste el video de Maverick sobre el fondo de inversiones al mundo? No lo he visto, rompeojete. No lo he visto, tal vez lo vea. ¿Por qué? Le dio duro, está bueno el video, en verdad le dio duro. Déjalo ahí, no le des importancia. ¿Qué? ¡No! Chat inhabilitado. Ya tú sabes por qué es verdad, que te da el chat inhabilitado, baby. Y la manito abajo, déjame ver cuánta manito abajo tiene, que yo puedo ver un vaina con la manito abajo. Déjame ver. No. Déjame ver. Wealthy trade. Vamos a seguir escuchando a ver si dice.
To the average home buyer. But this is not just a city problem. Harris County, Georgia, with a population of less than 35,000 sitting on the border of Alabama, is also rated as unaffordable. In the midst of this housing crisis, the Federal Reserve continues to raise interest rates. This makes mortgages a lot more expensive for families, especially young families looking to buy a house. According to the National Association of Realtors, the share of first-time home buyers is at an all-time low, while the average age of a purchaser is at an all-time high. Chair Powell, you have said that there has been, quote, an imbalance in the housing market. But if you're a Georgia family, parents in the mid-30s, young children, and all you want is to be able to afford your first home and place and build equity to one day pass that equity on to your kids, how are the Fed's actions helping that family afford a home?
Mm-hmm.
Our mandate is to provide maximum employment, use our tools to foster maximum employment and price stability. And we're using those tools really now to restore price stability at a time of the highest inflation in 40 years. I think that the same people who are having high mortgage costs, if they have a floating rate mortgage, are also experiencing high costs for all the basic necessities of life. And one of our most fundamental roles at the central bank is to keep price stability. So we have to prioritize that in what we do.
Yeah, I understand the tools and
yo creo que están en lo mismo esta gente, señores.
My concern is that we could have a cure that's worse than the disease. It doesn't do families any good if we stabilize housing prices while mortgage rates continue to skyrocket. It doesn't matter to me why a house is unaffordable. Maybe the house is unaffordable. Maybe the mortgage is unaffordable. Unaffordable is unaffordable. How does the Federal Reserve consider the total price of home ownership, including costs of mortgages, in executing that mandate to keep prices stable?
Housing inflation is a very important component of various inflation indexes, and the way that's calculated is the economists look at rents, and then for people who own a home, they impute a rent depending on the value of the home. So it actually does factor in, and I would say measures of new leases that are being signed and new housing prices show significant declines in inflation, not in price, but in inflation. And that will play through so that overall inflation over the course of...
Quédate aquí, hablemos de otra cosa. O sea, que eso es, no hablemos del sensei.
We're seeing mortgage rates go up. Yes or no, does this discourage folks who may have a low interest mortgage rate from putting their home on the market and then possibly paying double the cost
of the mortgage? Tres opciones le di.
It certainly could. People who are in a low mortgage, a fixed rate, low rate mortgage, I would assume many of them are not.
Vamos a ver, voten. Si hiciera esto, vamos al otro. 67%, vamos a ver.
For a company hoping to develop new housing.
¿Por qué habla contexto? Ya duró esto. Llegaron los defensores del sensei. No se escucha. ¿Cómo que no se escucha, güey? No le puedo preguntar al sensei si agarró la operación de hoy. ¿Y cómo le va a poder preguntar? Ya duró mucho esto. Vamos a ver. Sí, cierra esto. Huepa, espérate. No, sigue aquí, termina la reunión. Bueno, está fuerte, él sigue aquí. Está fuerte, él sigue aquí. Voten, voten. Déjame seguir la reunión mientras tanto.
Years well beyond when interest rate hikes have slowed or rates have even gone down. And I know you've got a difficult job and a tough situation, but I just hope that the Fed will think more about its actions and how they affect housing supply, even as it attempts to control housing demand. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Warnock. The last question, I believe, questioner is Senator Sinema is remote from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Powell, thank you for being here today. In raising interest rates last month by 25 basis points, the FOMC cited Russia's war against Ukraine as a key contributor to elevated global uncertainty. The war has serious implications for global energy and agricultural markets. And as you know, energy inflation in particular can appear in the form of higher prices of other goods and services. This feels like a substantial driver of inflation overall, and in my mind, you can't understand the global economy fully without assessing the range of possible outcomes in Ukraine. As we've also seen, the war created new supply chain problems overnight and has caused abrupt price swings in select committees. How is the FOMC assessing the economic impact of the war and the range of potential outcomes in order to inform how it sets monetary policy?
So the principal, I guess there are two things to say. One is that the principal way that the war has affected our economy is really through commodity prices, grain and particularly energy prices. That's the main thing. I think really, and those have both flattened out. Energy prices globally have settled down and they're at a higher level, and and food prices as well to some extent. So the second thing I would say is that it represents a significant risk. So the war in Ukraine, the outcome is uncertain, developments there are uncertain, and you have to think of it as a source of potential risk to the global economy and to our economy. We don't, and we look at alternative scenarios and things like that. We don't really do it from a geopolitical standpoint, but we do, of course, model scenarios where commodity prices are higher and
No, sigue aquí, que termine la reunión. Perfecto, vamos a seguir aquí. Ya, decidió el pueblo.
Thank you.
Y hay un gran porcentaje también que quiere que hablemos de otros temas aquí mismo. Vamos a ver si hacemos videíto aquí mismo antes de cerrar.
Interest rates are crowding out investment and making it more difficult for first-time homebuyers to buy a home. Inflation has also slowed housing development to a halt in Arizona, and as you know, Chairman, housing is a major economic contributor in my state. It's also clear that more spending comes with trade-offs, and it's why tackling inflation has historically been so difficult, and yet it's more important than ever that we get it under control. There's been much debate about a soft landing, where we get inflation under control without triggering recession, versus a hard landing, where inflation comes down but triggers a painful recession. Some economists are currently saying they see no landing right now, that growth is actually accelerating, and that more aggressive actions will be needed to get inflation under control. If true, that would be problematic.
Vamos a ver, gracias por los likes.
As I mentioned earlier, I think if you look at the data that's been coming in since earlier this year, you have seen stronger labor market conditions, higher inflation, stronger consumer spending, and also we saw some of the low inflation readings from the fourth quarter of last year revised away. If you take all of those, they kind of they may be to some extent related to things like seasonal adjustments or a warm January, but nonetheless they all point in the same direction, and they do suggest that the possibility that that ultimately would need to raise rates higher than had been expected. Of course, we have...
Reacción al video de Maverick sobre Salo. Yo no le voy a hacer una reacción. Tal vez lo vea, pero yo no le voy a hacer una reacción. Yo no le puedo dar visibilidad yo tal vez hable de eso. Yo lo veo y si él dijo algo importante, yo lo hablo, pero no voy a mencionar a Maverick. Vamos.
But making the decision that we'll make about what to do at the March meeting.
Thank you. On February 23rd, the Fed, the FDIC, and the OCC released another joint statement on crypto assets and liquidity risks posed to banking organizations. It's clear that regulators see undue risks for banks in the current environment and are taking a more conservative approach. Do you believe these risks are inherent to crypto assets and how they behave, or are some of the risks a product of the current regulatory and policy landscape for crypto assets in the U.S.?
So we're seeing
estamos viendo
really in the last close to a year now, we've seen just a remarkable set of events in the crypto space. Lots of companies collapsing. We've seen massive fraud. We've seen all kinds of things. I think, we have to be open to the idea that somewhere in there is technology that can be featured in productive innovation that makes people's lives better. However, in the near term, we see in crypto activity lots of things that suggest that regulated financial institutions should be quite cautious. And that's in doing things in the crypto space. And that's what we've issued 3 or 4 releases to the banks.
Baja el volumen de Powell. Perdón.
The Fed has.
Perdón, nosotros sentimos que las empresas que están reguladas deben de estar muy cuidadosas porque hemos visto, estamos atentos y entendemos que hay una tecnología ahí. Entendemos que hay una tecnología ahí.
Thank you, Senator Powell.
Thank you.
Gracias,
Senator
Paul.
Sinema. We conclude the hearing.
Se acabó.
The Fed must make sure that workers and families are at the center of every
La Fed se debe asegurar que los trabajadores y las familias están en el centro de todas sus decisiones.
In our economy too, as you've said, Mr. Chair, we know that higher capital requirements make banks safer and stronger. It allows them to make investments in their workers and their communities and our economy. That's what they should be doing instead of spending billions on buybacks. I look forward, Chair Powell, to working with you to strengthen our economy. For senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, these questions are due 1 week from today, Tuesday, March 14th.
Puede enviar más preguntas y tal. Ya se acabó. ¿A qué hora se acaba esa vuelta?
45 days from the day you receive them.
Bob Powell tiene un Rolex o un Casio.
Attendance today, only one member on each side was not here, one for health reasons, the other just because he's doing 12 different things. So I appreciate all that, and thanks for your testimony, your public service, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Bueno, ahí está, señores. Un aplauso para Jerome Powell. Rompió de verdad, el tipo metió mano. Entonces, sobre lo que no importa, los intereses van a seguir subiendo. ¿Ok? Mira, voy a grabarlo aquí mismo. Sobre lo que dijo Jerome Powell, acabamos de verlo ahora en vivo. Mira, swap. Punto que yo vi aquí. Hubo ataques ahí de políticos y de vaina, de que no, que... Voy a dar un resumen cortico y lo vamos a subir para YouTube para que la gente no tenga que ver estas 3 horas de video. Óyeme. Dijo que todavía falta mucho para bajar el interés. Los políticos le preguntaron y le pelearon y le dijeron que él no está con la gente, que él debe de prestarle más atención. Es cerrado este enlace, mami. Tú puedes entrar, no te va a ver.
¿Están en vivo?
Sí, estoy en vivo. Ay, qué rico. Uf. Gracias, mi amor. Los políticos le dijeron que si él piensa en las corporaciones o él piensa en la gente. Y él dijo que él piensa en la gente, que su interés es la gente, pero que definitivamente deben de seguir subiendo los intereses para que baje la inflación. Hubo mucha queja de que 40 años que no veían esta inflación, que la gente se está volviendo loca. Y él dijo, bueno, pero la única herramienta que yo tengo es reducir los gastos de la Reserva Federal y la inflación y subir los intereses. Y esa es la única manera que nosotros podemos reducir la inflación. Había uno ahí que se estaba quejando, el Mr. Scott, aquí lo tengo anotado, con un tremendo Apple Watch Ultra, quejándose de que la cosa es tan cara. Pero es que la gente no entiende que los gastos de la gente que no paran de gastos es lo que está devaluando el dinero. Es una ley normal de oferta y demanda. La única herramienta que tiene Jerome Powell en sus manos es subir los intereses. Entonces sube los intereses, la casa se pone más cara. Por cierto, uno de los del Congreso republicano dijo de que que la casa ahora cuestan el doble por los intereses. Él no dijo, él como cometió ese error y dijo no, porque las casas ahora cuestan el doble, pero él no se refería a la casa, porque la casa siguen contando lo mismo. Él se refiere a los intereses. Cuando yo compré esta casa, el interés era de 2.9. Ok, era de 2.9. Ahora estamos hablando de un 7%. Ok, es como 3 veces lo que va a costar esta casa en intereses. Jerome Powell dijo, yo entiendo eso, pero la única herramienta que yo tengo es subir los intereses, no tengo otra herramienta. Le preguntaron cosas de política, de que bueno, mira, cuando Joe Biden comenzó, la inflación estaba en 1.4, después en enero, un año después, estaba en 7.5 y ahora está en 8.5. ¿Tú no crees que sea culpa de Joe Biden? Él dijo, yo no me tengo que meter en eso, papi, lo mío es dinero, yo no sé de eso. Le preguntaron también de la guerra, él no se mete en eso, pero el enfoque principal es que él dice, vamos a seguir subiendo los intereses y entendemos que hay un problema, que debemos de rebajar, debemos de subir los intereses para que baje la inflación, para que la gente deje de estar gastando dinero. Hubo una que casi se puso a pelear con él, hubo otro también que se puso a pelear con él, no anoté el nombre, pero le decimos de cariño aquí en la comunidad, le decimos Mr. Bean, y hubo otra chica, otra demócrata también, que se puso a pelear con él, porque, coño, ¿cómo tú, en tu proyección, tú dijiste que 2 millones de personas van a perder su empleo? Y él dijo, es una consecuencia de lo que tiene que suceder. Ah, no, pero que tú sabes que eso es un tren, que cuando tú le das para adelante no hay forma de cómo detenerlo y tú no tienes un plan de cómo detenerlo. Y él dijo, pero es que no es lo que nosotros queremos, es lo que tiene que suceder. Porque gente como tú anda comprándose Apple Watch. Él no le dijo esa parte la agregué yo, pero eso fue. Y ella, no, que nosotros necesitamos esa mujer. Si le dicen ahora, tú quitarías a Jerome Powell de la Fed, ella dice, quítenlo, baby, porque ella dice, necesitamos a alguien en la Fed que le importe el pueblo, la gente en los Estados Unidos. Otro, cuando hablaron de las criptomonedas, no se habló mucho de criptomonedas como tal, no se mencionó nada de criptomonedas, sino de las criptomonedas estables y las regulaciones. Jerome Powell, él dice y él entiende que hay cierta tecnología ahí, y él dice y él entiende de que la regulación no puede ser algo que detenga la innovación. Regulación no puede detener la innovación. Él dice, hay algo que va a mejorar las vidas de la gente. Ahora, los legisladores son los que tienen que crear esas leyes para regularla. Le preguntaron en una republicana si él cree, para la próxima voy a anotar los nombres, o dígame si no importa los nombres, porque lo importante es lo que se dice, pero para que suene más bonito y más profesional, yo puedo anotar los nombres. Ella dijo que si él cree, porque él había dicho en enero del año pasado de que no veía lugar para las criptomonedas estables en el sistema bancario. Entonces ella lo citó y le dijo, ¿tú todavía piensas en eso? Y ella dice, y él dijo como que sí, pero no en el mal sentido. Él lo que quiere decir es que los bancos y las instituciones deben de mantenerse muy cuidadosas, porque ellos han estado viendo y él cree personalmente, él dice, ahí hay una innovación en las criptomonedas, pero hemos estado viendo cómo estafas y estafas, fracasos y fracasos, SHITCOINS y vaina y Marciano que perdió todo el dinero con Dragonari y con Eternal. Él dijo todo eso, o sea, como que él está atento a lo que está pasando, pero que le preocupa por todas las estafas que hay y que ciertamente las criptomonedas son un brazo que ayudan a estos estafadores. Así que él dijo claro, y aquí lo tengo anotado, las instituciones que están reguladas deben de prestarle mucha atención y ser muy cuidadosos, porque ahora mismo, esto lo agrego yo, estamos en el viejo oeste, el Wild Wild West. Sale un proyecto, un youtuber lo promociona, pum, 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 PBU, el proyecto desaparece y no se sabe ni quién fue que está detrás de ese proyecto. Mira, Chiva, todo el dinero que tiene y no se sabe hoy en día quién está detrás de ese proyecto. Una vez las criptomonedas estén debidamente reguladas, como yo creo que Jerome Powell está de acuerdo con eso, ese tipo de cosas no van a suceder. En verdad fue interesante, pero el punto principal aquí es que van a seguir subiendo los intereses. El mercado, yo le puedo mostrar aquí, al inicio se estuvo moviendo de manera curiosa, pero después se mantuvo. Fíjate, aquí cuando comenzó, estos fueron los primeros 3 minutos, digamos, del inicio. Cuando comenzó a hablar, bajó 1.67%, Bitcoin, que no es mucho, sí es mucho, más o menos mucho. Eso fue en los primeros 15 minutos, fíjate. Si ponemos aquí los 15 minutos, vamos a ver cómo dio ese bajón. Estaba lateralizando aquí, bajando un poquito de miedo, lateralizando. Y mira esta puya aquí. Bajó a los 21.951 Bitcoin. Perdón, déjame ponerlo aquí para que lo vean mi niño lindo de mamá. Mira, bajó a un precio que no habíamos visto desde febrero de febrero 14. Ok, llegó a ese punto. 21.994 en esos 15 minutos, señores. Fíjate que fue una sola barra. Si lo vemos en 15 minutos, si lo vemos en un minuto, tú te vas a dar cuenta que pero después, ya cuando comenzaron a hablar, volvió a los mismos niveles donde estaba anteriormente, que cualquier ignorante que no sepa de esto va a venir el marciano, pero ni se movió. No, ¿y eso qué fue? Y ese 1 punto, mire, eso fue un 1.62%. Ahora mismo se puede decir que está todavía en rojito, pero no tanto. Cuando viene a ver, se mete a verde. En conclusión, mi gente, si usted no le da like a este video, voy a lanzar una aplicación algorítmica para dar señales que va a costar barata. Va a ser bien barata. ¿Ok? Y usted va a entrar en la fase 2. Después de 2 meses que yo la tengo ya probando, usted va a entrar en la fase 2. Si usted no le da like a este video, oiga lo que vamos a hacer. Vamos a lanzarla en la fase 3. Solamente van a poder entrar 100 personas. ¿Ok? Va a ser algo exclusivo para 100 personas. Y va a ser barato de $214 al mes. Fase por fase. Así que dale like a este video, que esa es la manera que nosotros nos mantenemos vivos y nos mantenemos aquí. Coño, para yo no irme por ahí a hacer una aplicación ahí que te dé los buenos días y que haga broma y todo. Si les gustó, como siempre, una manita arriba. Marciano Finanzas cierra sesión. Lo de la aplicación es por el video que subí ayer del Sensei. Se lo voy a dejar en la descripción. Marciano Finanzas cierra sesión. Buscamos más noticias. Ya grabé uno. Déjame ver, ya que estamos aquí. Déjame buscar. Mándenme noticias por Twitter. Ya me llegó el desayuno. Me asusto, dice. Voy a vender el único curso de nuevas estafas. Una noticia para dar aquí mismo. Noticias, a ver. México kidnapping. ¿Qué pasó en México? What? Oh my God. Oh my God. Cuatro gringos fueron secuestrados. Han encontrado 2 muertos. What? Oh my God. ¿Tú sabes lo fuerte que es eso?
Tonight offering $50,000 in reward money for the safe return of the Americans who were in Mexico to buy medicine and got caught in a shootout. President Biden has been briefed and the State Department is working to secure their safety.
Señores, eso es grave. Cuenta porque es fuerte eso, Marciano. Bro. son ciudadanos americanos y aquí no juegan con eso. ¿Tú no ves cómo está en toda la noticia? No es, o sea, yo sé que toda la vida valen iguales, pero no es lo mismo. Aquí los Estados Unidos no juegan con eso. Mira cómo están ofreciendo $50,000 el FBI. No es lo mismo. 2 US hostages are deceased and 2 alive. They went for medical pressure. Wow. Y yo me da cosa a mí. Porque, bro, yo viajo mucho a México. Woman claiming to be the daughter of the one kidnapped. Wow, y ella estaba, una de las personas estaba yendo para una cirugía. Oh, qué fuerte eso. No, papi, yo soy ciudadano americano, déjate de eso, oíste. Déjate de eso. Yo soy ciudadano americano. No, ¿qué pasa? Yo escondo mi pasaporte dominicano, yo lo escondo, papi. ¿Tú crees que sí? Hay que ser realista. Hay que ser realista. ¿Tú crees que si es un dominicano que muere por allá, tú crees que la policía dominicana da una recompensa? Hay que ser realista. Oye, no se puede tocar a un ciudadano americano en otro lado. Y la mala fama. 2 of the kidnapped in Mexico has been killed. Wow. 2 of the 4 kidnapped in Mexico lo han matado. The U.S. hunts missing American after Mexico kidnap. Here's the reporting from this morning. Oh, papá, eso no, papá. Los Estados Unidos no juegan. Ya tienes dinero de dónde hacer dinerito. No sale bien las cosas. Te toca de vieja chismosa. Marciano traicionó a su patria. Yo, muchacho, corriendo. Me dijeron, cuando me dijeron de que, Marciano, ya tú te vas a ser ciudadano, yo saqué la tijera, así, mira. Y ellos, hey, ¿pero qué pasó? No, para cortar el pasaporte. Y yo, no lo tienes que cortar. Tú puedes tener doble ciudadanía. Y yo, ok. No, tú me dices, yo lo corto el pasaporte de una vez. Andaba yo con la tijera ese día. No, papá. Uy, disturbing trend. U.S. tourists kidnapped and killed in Mexico. 4 dead a Doctor's Day life. Wow. Eso es en Matamoros. Ahí está terrible la delincuencia. Oh, qué miedo. Oh, my God. Diablo, así no, marcianos. ¿Qué no, Héctor? Ay, papá. Así le iba a hacer yo al pasaporte. Mira, swing. ¿Te avergüenza de ser dominicano como el sensei? No, a mí no me avergüenza ser dominicano. Eso es otra cosa. A mí no me avergüenza ser dominicano. Soy dominicano con mucho orgullo. Pero, si a mí me pasa algo en México, yo entiendo que Estados Unidos va a hacer más show que lo que va a hacer mi país. Lo siento. Orgulloso de ser dominicano. Pero el pasaporte dominicano no sirve. Una cosa no tiene que ver con la otra. Eso es pura estrategia. Vale más la vida de un estadounidense que cualquier país. Es lamentable, brother. Es lamentable que valga más la vida de la vida de un estadounidense de cualquier otro país. Pero es lo mismo que tu hijo. O sea, la vida de tu hijo vale más que la vida de cualquier persona. Entonces, los Estados Unidos es así. Es así. ¿Entiendes? La vida de tu hijo va a importar más que la vida de cualquier otro niño. Suena feo, pero es una realidad. Ahí va Egnar. Los de América son americanos. Me cae muy mal Estados Unidos. Tú sabes, lo estadounidense, brother, lo estadounidense. Qué vaina. Oye, por eso es que yo nunca voy a México. A mí no me importa qué tan malo suene eso. Yo no voy a un lugar donde tenga el chance de no regresar. Lo siento. Cuando tú matas americanos inocentes, tú completamente te annihilate. Oye la palabra annihilate. ¿Cuál es la palabra? Te aniquilan por completo como un lugar turístico. Los carteles de Gigi son jodidamente estúpidos. Y si yo fuera su jefe, estaría muerto al anochecer. Se quedan tanto de la frontera del sur, uno pensaría que esos imbéciles se quedarían fuera de México. Pinche pendejos. Esto es... Ok, eso... Pinche pendejo. I love vacation in Mexico. So beautiful, affordable and fun. It's sad too. I know I won't be going there until they get their cartel under control. Can't even get an Uber because I remember when I was in high school, we would lie about our parents. Bueno, Marciano, háblate por 1000 años. Soy ciudadano americano y mi pasaporte dominicano nunca lo uso. El pasaporte dominicano solo para saber entrar a las redes. Es una realidad, bro, que yo a veces soy muy crudo con las realidades, pero yo te digo la realidad. No soy yo. No soy yo. Yo no hice la regla. Pero un gringo muere. No voy a decir americano porque se ofenden aquí, mi gente. Un estadounidense muere y hay un problema. No creo que haya un problema de guerra con México. Pero hay caliente, hay calentón. México no tiene que preocuparse por mi visita. Nunca. México border, México secuestro. ¿Cómo así? No entendí. Dame ver. ¿Qué ella dijo? México don't gotta worry about me visiting ever. Que ella nunca vaya a México. Va a ir para República Dominicana. Imagínate. Y en mi país, mira, debemos de ser muy cuidadosos con eso. Porque tú sabes que ustedes saben que el turismo lleva mucho dinero para República Dominicana. Así que hay que tener cuidado. Tommy Chuck Application en Matamoros, México. Today Global Update. Oye, fue a hacerse una cirugía de la barriga. Por eso es que hay que comer poco, hay que comer saludable. Pero es que no es americano, eso es malo, de los Yankees. Son estadounidenses y punto. Ay, Dios mío. Está bien. Estadounidense. Pero es que se ha quedado ese nombre, señores. Dejen de pelear con eso. Te voy a... To American... To kidnap and dead. Y hay video y todo. Mira la tipa ahí. Wow. Wow. Pero ¿por qué la matan? Si obviamente no tiene nada que ver. Bueno. Yo quemé mi pasaporte RD cuando me lo dieron de uso. Tú ves, y se molestan. Tú ves. Y se molestan conmigo si yo digo lo mismo. Yo no lo quemé. Ok, yo no lo quemé. Y no les recomiendo a nadie hacerlo porque funciona. Yo no estoy hablando mal de República Dominicana. Deja de hablar basura. Yo estoy hablando mal de mi país. Yo estoy hablando mal de mi país. ¿He dicho yo algo mal de mi país? ¿Qué yo he dicho de mi país? ¿Qué yo he dicho de mi país? ¿Ah? ¿Qué yo he dicho de mi país? Deja de hablar ridiculeces tú. Yo no he dicho nada mal de mi país. ¿Qué yo he dicho de mi país? Que el pasaporte es un disparate. Eso no tiene que ver con mi país. Eso no tiene que ver con mi país. Eso no tiene que ver con mi país. El pasaporte es un disparate. Un disparate el pasaporte. Las empresas de privacy tienen cada cierto tiempo hacer un análisis de navegadores web dejando de ver cómo es la peor opción. Las mejores tres: Brave, Mozilla, Leftwell. ¿Y tú qué navegador usas? Google Chrome. Vamos con Salomundo. Dígame, ¿qué hacemos? Marciano, muchas gracias por ti. Aprendí a hacer staking en Binance. Saludos y salúdame besos. Saludo a Alma Marcelo Gozo. Alma Marcelo Gozo. ¿Es una broma o es real? Es una bendición ser ciudadano norteamericano. Un país que te cuida. Bro, a mí me robaron el pasaporte en Perú. Bro, yo resolví ahí mismo. Y no le pare, Marciano, solo frustrados que no pueden salir de RD. Ojo con esta nueva pseudo plataforma evangelizando en la capital de Santiago. Anda al diablo. La nacionalidad del ser hijo que es patria y ser. Hablemos de la nueva moneda de Chiva. RD puro estafadores. Bueno, ahora hay que andar con cuidado, señores. Déjame ver. ¿A quién debo darle prioridad? El sensei. Prioridad, vamos a ver. Voten. El ignorante que averigüe quién fue George Floyd. Bro. Esos fueron unos policías que hicieron mal y están pagando ahora mismo una condena. ¿Ok? Eso es un caso y hay mucha corrupción en los Estados Unidos. ¿Ok? Y sucede. ¿Ok? Sucede. Pero no es como que los policías andan libres y no hay justicia. Se hizo justicia con lo que le hicieron eso a George Floyd. Ok, así que dejen de hablar disparate. La gente quiere ver a Salomundo. Yo puedo hacer un video leyendo el contrato de Salomundo. ¿Por qué tú defiendes tanto a Franklin? Yo no defiendo a Franklin. En el video yo ni hablé de él. Brother, porque mató a una colombiana. El lío se debe de hacer en Colombia. Y el tipo, yo tengo entendido que está preso. ¿Qué tú quieres que vaya a hacer el FBI? Espérate. Vamos a ver. Un gringo mató a una colombiana. Y ya el gringo, la policía de Colombia, felicidades, que agarraron a ese hijo de su maldita madre. ¿Verdad? Y lo metieron preso, a esa rata. Y está preso y va a durar la vida preso. ¿Qué va a hacer los Estados Unidos? Que diga, no, dámelo a mí, para mi cárcel. No, mató a una colombiana, él paga en Colombia. Un aplauso para las autoridades de Colombia que no lo dejaron ni salir. Y se hizo justicia. ¿Qué tú quieres que hagan los Estados Unidos? ¿Qué tú quieres que hagan los Estados Unidos? O sea, él mató. Malo es que los Estados Unidos haga algo. Y los Estados Unidos quiere decir, no, porque él es americano, él tiene que venir, entréguenmelo y dejarlo libre aquí. Eso es malo. Pero los Estados Unidos se quedan callados porque esa rata ya no lo van a defender. Es malo, Estados Unidos puede agarrarlo y Colombia puede agarrarlo. Su madre no tiene que ver con eso, Marciano, su madre no tiene que ver con eso. Lo capturaron en Panamá. Exactamente. Y si hubiese llegado a los Estados Unidos, aquí lo capturan. Marciano, ¿sabes algo sobre FTX? ¿Devolverán el dinero a Latinoamérica como lo hicieron en Japón? Puede ser que sí, claro que sí. Van a devolver. ¿Tú tenías dinero ahí? ¿Qué tú tenías ahí? Bueno, la gente quiere que le dé a los 3, pero la gente quiere más a los mundos. Dilox, es que yo no sé qué decide Dilox. Dilox está vendiendo un curso. Loco el que le compra el curso. Vamos a ver si vamos con Salomundo. ¿Por qué no hablas nunca de Newman? Bro, la gente no está en Newman aquí, déjame ver. Déjame yo preguntar aquí, ¿Newman o Salomundo? Vamos a ver el interés de la gente. Newman mi comunidad sabe que Newman es un estafador. Vamos a poner el Sensei, Salomundo o Newman. Vamos a ver, déjame ver el sentir de la gente. Yo hablo de la cosa que la gente me pida. Yo hablo de lo que la gente me pide. Vamos a ver. Voten a ver. Porque es que la gente, Salomundo y el Sensei, existe esa duda de que ellos son buenos. Pero Newman se sabe, el que caiga en eso de Newman, o sea, hay que darle un premio. Mira, Salomundo, 58%. Tú ves, Newman un 17%. Un 16%. Es que la gente, ¿qué yo voy a decir de Newman? Que su moneda es una estafa. La gente sabe eso. Si no sacas nada de un lugar, va y simple, ¿no? Tengo que ver el video de Maverick y voy a ver. Ya te terminó el live stream de 24 minutos. Qué concepto tan simple y bien explicado, literal. Tu sinceridad y humildad, Sensei. Gracias por tomarte el tiempo. Me encanta tu manera. Nos queda aprendizaje siempre. Manejo temporalidades. Hay un tro de lambones del Sensei, oíste. Basta de anuncios marcianos. Bro, paga por el YouTube vaina para que no te salgan anuncios. Me voy. En 2 horas vamos en vivo con traders expertos en mi canal de vaina. Vamos a hablar del Sensei y después voy a ver el video del Salomundo, ¿ok? Hablamos ahora. Marciano Finanzas, deja almorzar tranquilo al Marciano. Bye, bye, lo quiero mucho. Gracias por estar aquí. Disculpen si ofendí a alguien. Disculpen si ofendí a alguien. Pero no me importa. No, mentira. Bye, bye.